Chapter 498. Holding Xiao Yindong's head, Chu Xiu had actually exhausted himself. The heaven sun gazing at air and the soul-suppressing Hades song had severely suppressed his mental strength. Furthermore, Chu Xiu had used the sun-switching technique and the formless sealing palm in succession. Although he had killed Xiao Yindong with the series of attacks, he had expended a lot of energy. Yan Qishao silently looked at Chu Xiu, but he didn't choose to do anything. He wanted to do it, but he wasn't sure. Chu Xiu's strength was beyond his imagination. Although it was nominally Chu Xiu and Yan Qishao working together to kill Xiao Yindong, Yan Qishao was only assisting from the side. Chu Xiu was the one who actually attacked. Yan Qishao only used 20% of his strength. Although Chu Xiu seemed to be exhausted, Yan Qishao still didn't dare to make a move. Holding Xiao Yindong's head, Chu Xiu grinned at Yan Qishao and said, "I'll help you take a look at your plan to resurrect Lu Wenhou. But I'm afraid you'll be disappointed in the end." After saying that, Chu Xiu directly carried Xiao Yindong's head and returned to the tunnel. Yan Qishao also didn't say a word. At this time, in the central hall, Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi were still suppressing Xian Jiuyo. As for the others, including Lu Fengxian, they were fighting for halberd. Unfortunately, whether it was Lu Fengxian or some of the Unity of the World experts, even if some of them had touched halberd, they were still repelled by halberd. This 9-revolution divine weapon was simply too stubborn. It didn't give them any chance to get it. At this time, Fang Qi Shao and Xia Xiaolu finally arrived. With Xia Xiaolu's strength, he could participate in the fight for halberd. As for Fang Qi Shao, he didn't make a move and just stared at Ying Bailu. Ying Bailu frowned and said, "Fang Qi Shao, why are you staring at me instead of fighting for the peerless divine weapon?" Fang Qi Shao chuckled and said, "Why would I snatch that thing? I'm a sword user, so I won't be able to snatch Wushuang's sword. I reckon that after Wushuang senses my aura, he'll even take the initiative to attack me. I won't do that. Infatuated seed, I heard that you fought with Chu Xiu just now and were evenly matched. TSK, you've hidden your strength quite well. Why don't we fight again?" In fact, Fang Qi Shao was very similar to Ying Bailu in some aspects. He didn't care much about the empty titles on the Dragon and Tiger list. If the Dragon and Tiger list said he was third, then he was third. He also wouldn't take the initiative to challenge someone just because of this ranking. However, if he met an opponent he was interested in, Fang Qi Shao didn't mind stretching his muscles. He had fought with Zhong Xian and Zhang Qingzhen on the Dragon and Tiger list, but unfortunately, he was the one who suffered. Although the guy ranked 4th on the Dragon and Tiger list was elusive, Fang Qi Shao often roamed the Jianghu. He had met that guy before, but he was rebuffed. That guy's martial Dao was the martial Dao of killing people. Once he threw his flying dagger, he would see blood and determine life and death. It was extreme to the extreme. Fang Qi Shao was looking for someone to compare martial Dao with, not to risk his life, so he didn't fight with his opponent at that time. As for Chu Xiu, when Chu Xiu was in the 5 Qis collecting in Origin Realm, although Fang Qi Shao had fought with Chu Xiu, that was not when Chu Xiu was at his peak. Now that Chu Xiu had stepped into the unity of heaven and man realm, the two sides were very familiar. Fang Qi Shao was a little embarrassed to challenge him. After all, his ranking was higher than Chu Xiu's. This time, Ying Bailu in front of him had aroused Fang Qi Shao's interest. Ying Bailu rarely fought before, and Fang Qi Shao had not seen him before. However, Fang Qi Shao knew about the battle between Chu Xiu and Zhong Xian. He also knew about Chu Xiu's strength. Now that Ying Bailu could fight with Chu Xiu to this realm, it was enough to show how strong Ying Bailu was. Moreover, Fang Qi Shao knew about the Shangshui Ying clan's heritage. Ying Bailu probably had some trump cards that he had not taken out. Looking at Fang Qi Shao who was eager to fight, Ying Bailu frowned and said, "Fang Qi Shao, now is not the time to fight. If you are also interested in halberd, we can fight. But since you have no intention of fighting for halberd, why waste time here? I remember that you are not a person who likes to fight." Fang Qi Shao waved his hand and said, "You are wrong. It is not that I don't like to fight. It is just that most people do not interest me. I mean, Ing Bailu, you and I are old acquaintances. You have fought with Chu Xiu, why can't you fight with me? You don't have to be so biased, do you? While Fang Qi Xiao was entangled with Ing Bailu, Chu Xiu had already recovered some qi in the tunnel. He appeared in the hall with Xiao Yindong's head in his hand. When everyone saw Chu Xiu's figure, they couldn't help but cry out in surprise. Their eyes were filled with shock. Those who didn't notice Chu Xiu earlier were also attracted by the exclamations of the crowd. When they saw the item in Chu Xiu's hand, they all sucked in a breath of cold air. Xiao Yindong was dead. A dignified martial Dao Grand Master actually died in the hands of a junior martial artist like Chu Xiu. In the history of Jianghu, killing a martial Dao Grand Master at the unity of heaven and man realm had happened many times. Even in this generation of Jianghu, little celestial master Zhang Qingjin had done such a thing. Although Zhong Xian and the others did not have any battle records, everyone believed that the top 5 on the Longhu list were qualified to fight with martial Dao Grand Masters. It was just that their battle records were not circulated. But it was just hearsay. Now that Chu Xiu was standing here with Xiao Yindong's head in his hand, it was a great shock to the people present. For these martial artists in Jianghu, martial Dao Grand Masters were extremely special existences. Once they condensed the martial Dao true core, they would immediately become a respected Grand Master. They would even have the qualification to establish their own sect and become a true powerhouse in Jianghu. However, such a martial Dao Grand Master was now beheaded by a junior like Chu Xiu. They could not help but be shocked. Ing Bailu took a deep look at Chu Xiu. He was also shocked. How did Chu Xiu do it? With Ing Bailu's strength, if he were to face a martial Dao Grand Master in a life and death battle, Ing Bailu would not dare to say that he could win. However, if he used the Ing clan's forbidden trump cards, Ing Bailu would only have a little more confidence, but there was still no hope of winning. Looking at the shocked Fang Qi Xiao, Ing Bailu said indifferently, "If you want to fight, you should find Chu Xiu, not me. That person is much fiercer than me. When I fought him just now, he did not use his full strength." Fang Qi Xiao paused, and the shock on his face turned into a grin. He chuckled and said, "It's true that Chu Xiu did not use his full strength, but you didn't use your full strength either, did you? My Sword King City's sect leader once said that among the 9 great families, your Xianxia Ing clan is the one that hides its strength the most. For so many years, the Xianxia Ing clan has been ranked first most of the time. Even when it was surpassed by others, your Xianxia Ing clan never panicked. Who knows when you'll catch up?" But in fact, the Xianxia Ing clan was deliberately hiding their true strength. If the Xianxia Ing clan revealed their true strength, it would make the other aristocratic families feel despair. Your style is the same as the Ing clans. If you have the strength, just show it. Why hide it so deeply? While Fang Qi Xiao was still talking nonsense with Ing Bailu, the outcome of the battle between Dong Qikuan and the others had already been decided. Xian Jiuyo had exhausted the power he had obtained from LV Wenho's mark. Now that the mark had disappeared, he no longer had the strength to fight the 2 martial Dao Grandmasters. His aura had been shattered by the 2 martial Dao Grandmasters. However, Xian Jiuyo's group seemed to be undying existences in this place of suppression. Although the aura on his body had been scattered, he had reformed his body. However, this body was a little smaller than before and appeared to be a little weaker. Xian Jiuyo said anxiously, "Things have gone wrong. We can't win. What should we do now?" Shui Wuxiang didn't say anything. Just when Xian Jiuyo was about to say something, Shui Wuxiang's clone appeared from the ground with Xiao Yindong's headless corpse. Shui Wuxiang said in a deep voice, "What else can we do? Now, we can only forcefully revive Lord Wenho. It doesn't matter if we have a suitable body or if we have enough qi and blood. In any case, this is the only method we have left. Otherwise, if we attract the experts outside, especially the ox-nosed Daoist sect and the bald donkey Buddhist sect, once they make a move, we won't even be able to keep our true spirits." Shi Jiuling. Activate the formation and extract this fellow's qi and blood. Together with the qi and blood that we have accumulated, place them at the center of the formation. Xian Jiuyo and I will stall for time." As soon as he finished speaking, Shui Wuxiang and Xian Jiuyo immediately rushed up to block Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi. However, the two of them didn't have the cultivation of a martial Dao grandmaster, so they were directly shattered by the two. When they reformed their bodies, their strength wasn't even comparable to the unity of heaven and man realm. However, the time that the two of them bought was more than enough because the array was set up by Shui Wuxiang beforehand. This place was the place where Marquis LV Wenho was sealed. There weren't any materials here, but in these 10,000 years, Shui Wuxiang had been slowly dismantling the formation that was suppressing them. Then, he transferred the materials here and laid down a formation that could resurrect Marquis LV Wenho. Although the formation had been set up, there was a deviation in the plan. No one could guarantee whether LV Wenho could be resurrected. With a wave of Shi Jiuling's hand, Xiao Yendong's corpse was instantly dried up and turned into beads of blood that fell onto the formation below the coffin. Shi Jiuling threw out a large pile of beads of blood and formed a seal with his withered hands. In an instant, a torrential demonic aura filled the sky and a wave of ghostly wails resounded throughout the hall. Chapter 499. As Shi Jiuling triggered the array, the entire hall was instantly shrouded in demonic aura and became extremely cold. Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi's faces changed abruptly and they couldn't help taking a few steps back. After all, that was the ancient demon deity, LV Wenho. Xian Jiuyo had only borrowed a wisp of aura left behind by LV Wenho, and he could already fight them to such an extent. If the real LV Wenho came, how terrifying would he be? At this moment, a large amount of demonic aura gushed out from the coffin that was suppressing LV Wenho. The demonic aura in the coffin seemed to be boiling and constantly surging. At the same time, the blood beads in the center of the array continued to pour into it, causing the demonic aura to surge even more violently. The 36 true martial evil extermination swords that were nailed to the coffin were trembling as well, and it seemed like they could no longer hold the coffin down. In the end, an explosion resounded, and the 36 true martial evil extermination swords instantly exploded. The coffin opened, but there wasn't a demon deity in the dense black mist that everyone had imagined. Instead, a smaller coffin emerged from the coffin. To be precise, it wasn't a coffin, but a humanoid figure cast from bronze. The humanoid figure was burly and wore battle armor, but it didn't have a head. It was as if someone had cast a headless corpse in bronze water. Furthermore, the humanoid figure was engraved with dense runes. If one took a closer look, they would discover that the runes on the left side of the humanoid figure were Daoist runes, while the right side was Buddhist Sanskrit. Since ancient times, Daoist and Buddhist sects had been opposing each other. In the past 1,000 years, the only time that Daoist and Buddhist sects joined forces was when they faced the Kunlun devil cult. However, LV Wenho actually managed to get both Daoist and Buddhist sects to join forces to suppress him. It had to be said that regardless of whether LV Wenho was righteous or evil, he had done it to the extreme. The qi and blood condensed by Shi Jiuling were constantly being absorbed into LV Wenho's body. Gradually, a figure emerged. It was hazy, but its aura was extremely powerful. Even a martial grandmaster like Dong Qikuan couldn't help but have the urge to kneel. Retreat. Dong Qikuan barked and ordered the Dong clan's people to retreat. It was only at this moment when he sensed the terrifying aura that his rationality completely overcame his greed. The things left behind by Marquis LV Wenho were indeed extremely precious, but no matter how precious these things were, one needed to be alive to enjoy them. However, right at that moment, LV Wenho's figure suddenly erupted with countless strands of demonic energy that entangled everyone. The aura was so majestic that it caused everyone's expressions to change. Dong Qikuan and the others quickly blocked the threads, and so did Chu Xiu and the others. Moreover, Chu Xiu also discovered that those silk threads were almost all aimed at the two martial Dao grandmasters, Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi, as well as the younger generation martial artists like Chu Xiu. The weaker or older martial artists were not targeted. Chu Xiu's own consumption was not small, but he still directly slashed those demonic energy threads. The power of these demonic energy threads was not small. Fortunately, Chu Xiu had stayed in the tunnel for a while to recover his strength, otherwise he might not have been able to resist them. Moreover, at this time, the blood beads under the coffin also decreased rapidly. This made the expressions of Shi Jiuling and the others suddenly change, and they shouted in a low voice, "Oh no! The power of qi and blood is not enough." Previously, according to Shui Wuxiang and the others' calculations, as long as they killed these 3 martial Dao Grand Masters, the power of qi and blood would be completely enough. Killing more people was actually just insurance. But now, only one of the 3 martial Dao Grand Masters died. Of course, the power of qi and blood was not enough. But now that their strength was right here, where could they go to kill more people? So on this side, Shui Wuxiang directly gritted his teeth and said, "Everyone, sacrifice your true spirits. Otherwise, if Lord Wenhou cannot be resurrected, none of us will live." Shi Jiuling and Xian Jiuyo exchanged a glance, both standing in the middle of the array. The grayish-white flames burned, becoming more vigorous, and the demonic energy threads that extended from LV Wenhou's body also became more vigorous. This time, even Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi couldn't withstand it. They were martial Dao Grand Masters, so the pressure they felt was also the greatest. The two of them gritted their teeth, directly burst out with all their strength, slashed the threads in front of them, and directly fled. Dong Qikuan wanted to save the Dong clan's disciples, but seeing that the situation was getting worse, Dong Qikuan didn't dare to stay any longer. As Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi fled, the demonic energy threads became more and more vigorous, even Chu Xiu and the others couldn't withstand it. At this moment, there was a slight change in Chu Xiu's expression. This scene was also a little beyond his imagination. LV Wenhou was already suppressed to this extent, so how could he still have such strength? In his previous life, how did Lu Fengxian obtain this inheritance? Seeing that something was wrong, Chu Xiu was about to call out to Lu Fengxian to temporarily retreat, but the demonic energy thread suddenly wrapped around Lu Fengxian, forcibly pulling her into that person's coffin. The strength of the demonic energy threads released by LV Wenhou was actually about the same, but among them, the ones who received the most attention were Chu Xiu, Fang Qi Shao, Ying Bailu, Yan Fian, and Lu Fengxian. Among these 5 people, only Lu Fengxian and Yan Fian were the weakest. However, Yan Fian was a woman, so even if LV Wenhou wanted to revive her, he would choose someone else, and not Yan Fian. Therefore, the strength that Yan Fian had to endure was actually the lightest. However, Lu Fengxian's strength was a bit weaker than Chu Xiu and the others, so while Chu Xiu and the others were fine, Lu Fengxian was pulled into that coffin. Chu Xiu's expression changed, and he wanted to cut open the demonic energy threads, but it was useless. Chu Xiu switched to Buddhist martial arts, and even used the great art of changing sun, but it was still useless. On the other side, Shui Wuxiang and the others revealed a trace of joy. Previously, they thought that Lu Fengxian's body was the most suitable for Lord Wenhou, and now it seemed that it was indeed so. Lord Wenhou's choice was exactly the same as theirs. Lu Fengxian's body was imprisoned in that coffin, and LV Wenhou's bronze body was tightly attached to her body. A misty radiance flickered, and the hazy figure fused into Lu Fengxian's body, causing Lu Fengxian to let out a cry of pain. Just when everyone thought that Lu Fengxian's body would be completely taken over by LV Wenhou, Lu Fengxian's body suddenly emitted a dim light. That dim light was actually emitted by the small jade pendant on her chest. That dim light was very dim, but it was this dim light that prevented LV Wenhou's true spirit from entering Lu Fengxian's body. And when LV Wenhou's true spirit wanted to leave Lu Fengxian's body, that dim light was actually obstructing him. Just like that, the bodies of Shui Wuxiang and the others below started to change. Xian Jiuyo and Shui Wuxiang's bodies became dimmer and dimmer, the black mist dissipated, and the water vapor evaporated. Shi Jiuling wasn't any better. Cracks had already appeared on his bones, and it was obvious that he wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Moreover, the runes in the entire palace started to flicker, and it was a clear sign that the seal was about to be completely destroyed. At this moment, a skeleton covered in flames ran out from the tunnel, and it was Yan Qishao. The seal had already loosened, and the last chain that imprisoned Yan Qishao also broke. Shui Wuxiang roared, "Quickly come and help us." Yan Qishao also didn't say a word, and directly entered the array, burning his true spirit to support LV Wenho in resisting the dim light from the jade pendant. But no one knew what the jade pendant was, and even with Yan Qishao's help, it still firmly imprisoned LV Wenho's true spirit. At the last moment, LV Wenho's true spirit finally couldn't hold on any longer, and it exploded with a loud bang. No! Shui Wuxiang and the others roared in anger, and their voices revealed endless unwillingness and grief. LV Wenho's true spirit was previously sealed in the bronze humanoid, and this thing was used to imprison LV Wenho. But under Shui Wuxiang's control, he had changed the soul-suppressing and soul-locking curse into the soul-accumulating and soul-locking curse, which allowed this array to have the effect of protecting the true spirit. Therefore, LV Wenho only had one chance. Once his true spirit broke free from the shackles, but he didn't manage to seize another body, it would inevitably shatter like this. They had schemed for so long, and finally, someone had come in. Although the process was a little rough, it could still be considered smooth. But who would have thought that in the end, they would be defeated by such an inexplicable thing? But what happened next was somewhat out of everyone's expectations. After LV Wenho's true spirit shattered, it didn't dissipate. Instead, it was still imprisoned by the dim light of the jade pendant, and in the end, it actually fused into Lu Fengxian's body. Lu Fengxian held his head, and a pained expression appeared on his face as he closed his eyes. But when he opened his eyes again, his gaze was very frightening. No one could describe that kind of gaze. It was a kind of indifferent feeling, as if he was looking down on the world, disregarding everything, as if he was a god. But this kind of gaze only existed for a moment before it disappeared, and what replaced it was Lu Fengxian's confused gaze. Lu Fengxian subconsciously waved his hand, and the unparalleled halberd, which was originally repelling Lu Fengxian, flew into Lu Fengxian's hand on its own, and in an instant, a frightening light blossomed from it. Shui Wuxiang and the others looked at each other, and a trace of confusion appeared in their eyes. Did they succeed or not? Lord Wenho's true spirit had shattered, but the shattered true spirit had fused into this boy's body. Moreover, the unparalleled halberd had taken the initiative to recognize Lu Fengxian as its master. What the hell was going on? Did seizing someone's body become an inheritance? But Shui Wuxiang and the others didn't have the time to think about this. They had burned their true spirits, and were only left with a single breath. So Shui Wuxiang and the others immediately made their move. They randomly found 4 weak cultivators present, and pounced on them, occupying their bodies, and seizing their bodies to be reborn. With their current strength, it was unrealistic to find strong cultivators, and they didn't have the time to be picky about height and talent. Their first priority was to preserve their lives. Chapter 500. The seal-suppressing LV Wenho had already been broken, and the whole place looked like it was about to collapse. Lu Fengxian held the unparalleled divine weapon and walked towards Chu Xiu with a slightly confused look on his face. However, Chu Xiu quietly took a step back and condensed the aura around him to the extreme. Chu Xiu couldn't be blamed for being nervous. In fact, when they saw Lu Fengxian move, everyone present also subconsciously took a step back. Although they had watched LV Wenho's true soul shatter with their own eyes, there were too many incredible things that could happen at LV Wenho's level. Only God knew if Lu Fengxian would be possessed or not. Lu Fengxian also reacted at this time. He smiled bitterly and said, "Brother Chu, I'm really fine. LV Wenho's true soul has completely shattered." Chu Xiu quietly used the heaven sun gazing at air technique to check again. After finding no abnormalities, he said, "Did you get LV Wenho's inheritance?" Lu Fengxian nodded and said, "You can say that, but I think LV Wenho himself didn't want to give me the inheritance. Moreover, I also got some vague memories, but I can't remember them." As soon as this statement came out, everyone present, including Fang Qi Shao and Ing Bailu, looked at Lu Fengxian with strange eyes. This was a great opportunity. That was the inheritance of the ancient demon lord LV Wenho, and now Lu Fengxian was holding the unparalleled divine weapon that belonged to LV Wenho. It could be said that all the benefits this time were in the hands of Lu Fengxian. Even Fang Qi Shao and Ning Bailu were a little jealous of Lu Fengxian's luck. In fact, among those who entered the place where LV Wenho's seal was suppressed this time, Lu Fengxian didn't stand out at all, excluding Dong Qikuan and the other two martial Dao grandmasters. The most outstanding ones were Chu Xiu, who had killed a martial Dao grandmaster, and Ning Bailu, who had displayed an unparalleled cultivation base. In the end, neither of them managed to obtain the inheritance. Everything was taken by Lu Fengxian. It had to be said that luck was sometimes more important than strength. Puzzled, Chu Xiu pointed at the jade pendant on Lu Fengxian's chest and asked, "What is this?" Everyone could see that without this jade pendant, it was estimated that Lu Fengxian would have been possessed by Lu Wenho. Because of this jade pendant, Lu Fengxian was able to reverse the situation. LV Fengxian took out the jade pendant. However, there was already a crack on the jade pendant. Touching the crack on the jade pendant, Lu Fengxian's expression was a little distressed. "When I was young, my mother asked for this jade pendant from a temple on a mountain for me. It was blessed by an eminent monk. When I was young, I was a little weak and sickly, so my mother asked me to wear this jade pendant at all times, saying that it could keep me safe for a lifetime." Chu Xiu was a little speechless. Lu Fengxian was born with divine strength. Even if he didn't cultivate a body-tempering cultivation method, his strength was not inferior to a martial artist who cultivated a body-tempering cultivation method. But he was actually weak and sickly when he was young. However, what surprised Chu Xiu even more was the origin of this jade pendant. He asked curiously, "Brother Lu, who was the eminent monk who gave you this jade pendant? You can't really think that ordinary things can resist Lu Wenho's true spirit, right?" Lu Fengxian was a person with luck, Chu Xiu was very sure, so he was also surprised that the person who gave Lu Fengxian this jade pendant should be a reclusive eminent monk, at least at the level of Master Tam Yuan. However, Lu Fengxian shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "That eminent monk is an eminent monk in the eyes of ordinary people, but in fact, he doesn't know martial arts. The last time I went back to the northern Yen to visit my relatives, I wanted to see this master, but the temple was already abandoned. I asked the villagers around, and they said that the master was old, and the acolytes that he took in were tired of the lack of pilgrims in the temple, and that it was too poor, so they went to a big temple. The master couldn't hold on for long, and passed away several years ago." Chu Xiu was speechless. Since the master was gone, he wouldn't be able to find anything. However, it was obvious that this jade pendant was a treasure. It couldn't guarantee Lu Fengxian's safety for a lifetime, but it could guarantee his safety for a while, just like now. Looking at the crumbling hall around him, Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "Brother Lu, let's go. This place is about to collapse." LV Fengxian nodded. The others still wanted to search around to see if there were any treasures, but seeing that they couldn't hold on for much longer, they could only grit their teeth, turn around, and run out. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Dong Qikuan and Su Tingyi had ugly expressions on their faces. They were forced to come out, and it could be said that their trip was in vain. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family also arrived with the other members of the Dong family, and they were in a cautious and defensive posture. They had found such a large tomb during the mountain opening ceremony. Of course, not all the martial artists of the Dong family had entered it, but some of them had returned to the Dong family to inform the patriarch. For relics like this, the Dong family would usually leave half of its people outside to provide support, in order to prevent any unforeseen events from happening and everyone being caught in one fell swoop. The people brought by the patriarch of the Dong family were to provide support outside. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family's expression was also a little ugly. He snorted coldly and said, "Qikuan, so many disciples of our Dong family were there. As the patriarch, you abandoned so many disciples and fled alone. Is this your responsibility as the patriarch of the Dong family?" Dong Qikuan's face was a little red. At that time, he really didn't think so much, and he only thought about saving his own life. However, now that the patriarch of the Dong family pointed out in front of so many people, Dong Qikuan still felt a little embarrassed. Dong Qikuan couldn't help but explain, "Patriarch, it's not that I don't want to save my disciples, but you didn't see that scene. That was the true spirit of the ancient demon god Lv Wenho. Once it unleashed its power, let alone a martial Dao Grand Master, I guess even a true fire spirit refinement realm expert wouldn't be able to withstand it. If I escaped first, I could still save some strength. If I was in there, I'm afraid even I would have to die there." The best way to cover up one's weakness was to exaggerate the enemy's strength, and this was what Dong Qikuan was doing now. In fact, at that time, Dong Qikuan was far from being unable to withstand it, but he was really scared, and subconsciously chose to escape first. However, the patriarch of the Dong family was also a shrewd person, and he knew what Dong Qikuan was thinking at a glance. He couldn't help but snort coldly and said, "Even a true fire spirit refinement realm expert couldn't withstand it? You even fought with a true fire spirit refinement realm expert? Why didn't I know?" Just when Dong Qikuan was about to say something, he saw that many martial artists had already escaped from the big tomb, and many of them were members of the Dong family, which made Dong Qikuan immediately let out a sigh of relief. He quickly called a martial artist over and asked, "What's the situation inside?" The martial artist of the Dong family panted and immediately told him what had happened, but after listening to it, the patriarch of the Dong family was so angry that his face turned red. "Trash. Dong Qikuan, is this how you act as the patriarch? You're the first to escape when you encounter a crisis, but in the end, you leave the opportunity to others." In the eyes of the patriarch of the Dong family, if Dong Qikuan didn't go out, there was no reason why a junior could obtain Lv Wenho's inheritance, but Dong Qikuan, a martial Dao Grand Master, couldn't. Dong Qikuan's face turned red, but he still lowered his head and said in a deep voice, "Patriarch, please calm down. It's not impossible. Patriarch, don't forget that this is the opening ceremony of the Dong family, and everything found belongs to the Dong family, including Lv Wenho's inheritance and the divine weapon Peerless Halberd." As soon as they heard Dong Qikuan's words, the surrounding martial artists of the Dong family and Su Tingyi immediately understood what he meant. Dong Qikuan was going to ignore the rules and seize the inheritance that belonged to Lu Fengxian. Logically speaking, the rules of the mountain opening ceremony was that so long as it was something that could be taken away, then the person who obtained it could take it away. If one had to hand over the things one found, then who would participate in the mountain opening ceremony? Go and play by yourselves. Therefore, what Dong Qikuan was doing now was disregarding the rules. Su Tingyi, who was standing aside, didn't say anything. He was an outsider, and there were so many people of the Dong family here, so he definitely couldn't get any benefits, so he could only be a spectator with peace of mind. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family frowned and said, "But the rules of the opening ceremony." Dong Qikuan sneered and said, "Patriarch, the rules are dead, but people are alive. Those are the ancient demonic god Lv Wenho's cultivation method and peerless 9th revolution divine weapon. It is worth it to break the rules for these things, and bear some infamy, but it is also worth it." The patriarch of the Dong family was a martial artist of the older generation who adhered to the old rules, and he still wanted to save some face, so he was somewhat reluctant to break the rules. But at this time, Dong Qikuan encouraged, "Patriarch, that is Lv Wenho's inheritance cultivation method. Not to mention the peerless divine weapon, Lv Wenho's inheritance cultivation method must be above the 9th revolution." The words 9th revolution cultivation method tilted the balance in the patriarch's heart, because the Dong family didn't have a 9th revolution cultivation method. The cultivation methods in the Jianghu, from the 1st revolution to the 9th revolution, were actually divided into 3 grades. Generally, the 1st revolution to the 3rd revolution were the ordinary ones, and most of the rogue martial artists and some small sects and families had them. The 4th revolution to the 6th revolution were already considered good cultivation methods, and the martial artists without a bit of luck and background couldn't get them. As for the 7th revolution to the 9th revolution level cultivation methods, generally only people with profound luck and inheritance, and some big forces could get their hands on them. As for the peerless cultivation methods and supreme cultivation methods, except for some people with great luck and luck, only forces at the level of the Great Light Temple were qualified to have them. The strength of the Dong family was not weak, but the Dong family's strongest internal cultivation method was only at the 8th revolution level, which was not weak, but also not strong. If they could get the demonic god LV Wenho's cultivation method inheritance, it would be a 9th revolution level existence. People liking Bailu and Fang Qi Shao didn't care, because they could choose more than one 9th revolution cultivation method. But for the Dong family, even if they gave up their current cultivation method and changed to LV Wenho's cultivation method, it was worth it. Chapter 501. Just as Dong Qikuan had said, rules were dead, but people were alive. With the inheritance of LV Wenho in front of him, even the patriarch of the Dong family was tempted. In fact, the patriarch of the Dong family was not young anymore. Although he still had a long lifespan, his qi and blood were already declining. At this time, he couldn't enter the true fire spirit refining realm even if he cultivated a peerless divine skill, let alone the 9 revolutions cultivation method. Therefore, the patriarch of the Dong family wholeheartedly considered the Dong family. In this generation, the Dong family was neither high nor low among the 9 great families. It was an awkward position. Moreover, there was no successor among the Dong family's descendants. Not to mention an excellent disciple like Bailu, they couldn't even enter the top 50 of the Longhu list. If they could obtain LV Wenho's inheritance, the strength of the next generation of the Dong family would definitely improve greatly. One day, they might be able to rank among the top of the 9 great families. They might even be able to compete with the Xianxia Ying family. Thinking of this, the patriarch of the Dong family became eager. He nodded and said, "All right, we'll do as you say." However, at this time, a martial artist of the Dong family said hesitantly, Patriarch, although Lu Fengxian is a rogue cultivator, she's not simple. He's very close friends with Chu Xiu of the Guanzhong torture room. He's also good friends with Xia Xiaolu of the World Alliance. I heard that Lu Fengxian was even appreciated by Qinqing Di. Qinqing Di once invited Lu Fengxian to join the World Alliance, but Lu Fengxian refused. If we forcibly snatch Lu Fengxian's opportunity, won't we get into trouble? Dong Qikuan and the patriarch of the Dong family looked at each other. They really didn't know about this. They were all martial artists of the older generation. Naturally, they wouldn't care about what happened in the Jianghu of the younger generation. But Dong Qikuan shook his head and said with a cold smile, "No matter, this is West Chu, not the Guanzhong torture room. The one we are moving against is not Chu Xiu, so we don't need to worry about the Guanzhong torture room. The same goes for the Heaven Alliance. If Lu Fengxian is a member of the Heaven Alliance, the Dong clan will naturally give face to Qinqing Di. However, Lu Fengxian had nothing to do with the Heaven Alliance. He was just a good friend of Qinqing Di's disciple. He wasn't worth such a big deal. Although Qinqing Di is overbearing, he still has to abide by the rules and be reasonable. There's no need to care about the Heaven Alliance either." Seeing that the patriarch was confident, the disciple of the Dong clan didn't say anything else. After all, as long as he obtained the cultivation technique, he would be qualified to cultivate it as a disciple of the Dong clan. At this time, Chu Xiu, Lu Fengxian, and the others had also escaped from the big tomb. Not long after they left, the whole tomb began to collapse. Seeing this scene, Chu Xiu couldn't help but shake his head. In fact, everyone had neglected the fact that this big tomb was originally a treasure. Back then, this big tomb was built to suppress Marquis LV Wenho. It should have been the joint effort of Taoism and Buddhism. The inside of this big tomb was sealed by double formations of Taoism and Buddhism, and all of them were passed down from ancient times. If they could make a copy of it, it would be very worthwhile to study it. However, it was too late now. The big tomb had collapsed, and the people who came later could only find some scattered runes, which were not very useful. After leaving the big tomb, Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian were ready to leave and recuperate for a period of time. Chu Xiu was ready to recover his strength. He had just killed a martial Dao Grand Master, and he was a little exhausted. He had hurt some of his vitality, so he needed to recuperate in time. As for Lu Fengxian, he needed to find a place to enter seclusion to break through to the oneness of heaven and man realm. That's right, he wanted to break through to the oneness of heaven and man realm. This time, Lu Fengxian benefited not only from Marquis Lv Wenho's inheritance, but also from Marquis Lv Wenho's true spirit fragment into Lu Fengxian's body, which also gave Lu Fengxian an extremely majestic power. Now, Lu Fengxian had not refined this power, but he could already feel that he was at the threshold of the oneness of heaven and man realm. He only needed to enter seclusion to refine it. Even Chu Xiu had to admit that Lu Fengxian's creation was really incomparable. Along the way, Chu Xiu had also seized a lot of opportunities, but he had also fought and killed more. After going through so many twists and turns, Chu Xiu had obtained his current realm and strength. Although Lu Fengxian had also encountered a lot of things, it was not as many as Chu Xiu. However, he had caught up so quickly, and this speed even made Chu Xiu feel a little jealous. Sure enough, luck was something that could not be explained. Just as Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian were about to leave, the Dong family's martial artists had already surrounded them. The martial artists present were suddenly stunned, and they did not know what the Dong family wanted. Chu Xiu frowned, and suddenly felt that something was wrong. Dong Qikuan stood out and said with a smile, "My Dong family is very grateful that everyone has come to participate in my opening mountain ceremony. However, according to the rules, some things belong to my Dong family, so if you have taken something from my Dong family, please hand it over." As soon as these words came out, everyone present was stunned, and then they subconsciously looked at Lu Fengxian, and immediately retreated. In the big tomb that suppressed Marquis Lv Wenho, they did not obtain any benefits at all. Even if they were asked to hand it over, they would not be able to. The only one who had obtained benefits was Lu Fengxian. Lu Fengxian frowned, but did not say anything. At this time, Dong Qikuan looked at Lu Fengxian with a fake smile, and said, "Little friend Lu, if you have taken something, then hand it over." "Do you really want me to say it by name?" Lu Fengxian's expression did not change, and she said, "Dong family head, what do you mean?" According to the rules of the opening mountain ceremony, everything that can be taken away, and only the things that can't be taken away will belong to the Dong family. Dong Qikuan said indifferently, "Oh, that's right. Since it's like this, then I will leave little friend Lu here, and then you will not be able to take it away, right?" As soon as these words came out, the expressions of everyone present changed, and it seemed that Dong Qikuan was prepared to completely break the rules and act shamelessly. Everyone present looked at Lu Fengxian with a trace of sympathy. The strength of this Lu Fengxian's karmic luck really made them envious. Among so many people, only she had obtained the inheritance of the demonic god Lv Wenho. But no matter how strong one's karmic luck was, it was not stronger than one's fist. At present, the Dong family's fist was stronger, and it was obvious that they wanted to seize Lv Wenho's inheritance. What could Lu Fengxian do? At the level of the Dong family, it was fine for them to abide by the rules, but even if they broke the rules and seized the inheritance of the younger generation, they would at most be scolded, and so what? In any case, they would not be hurt. At the side, Chu Xiu said coldly, "Dong family head, you have broken the rules of the mountain opening ceremony. Aren't you afraid of being despised by the other martial arts forces of West Chu?" Dong Qikuan glanced at Chu Xiu, and said indifferently, "Despised? Our Dong family has been in the martial world for a long time. When have we ever been afraid of being scolded?" "Chu Xiu, I know you are good friends with Lu Fengxian, but you'd better not get involved in this matter. Now, the wisest choice for you is to persuade your friend to hand over Lv Wenho's inheritance and the unparalleled divine weapon, and you can leave safely. Otherwise, you can leave, but I'm afraid Lu Fengxian will have to stay in our Dong family as a guest for a while." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. It seemed that the reputation of the Guanzhong torture room was not very famous in the martial world, and the Dong family did not have the slightest fear of it. Of course, Chu Xiu soon found out that the Dong family was now blinded by greed, and the Guanzhong torture room was not the only thing they were not afraid of. The Dong family had gone too far in this matter. Even Fang Qishao, who had not planned to speak up before, could not help but speak up. Hey, don't you think your Dong family is a little too unreasonable? If you do this, who will help your Dong family the next time they hold the mountain opening ceremony? Dong Qikun glanced at Fang Qishao, and said indifferently, so it turns out to be young Master Fang of Sword King City. Young Master Fang, you don't need to worry about my Dong family's matters. This matter has nothing to do with Sword King City. It was true that Sword King City was stronger than his Dong family. Normally, when Fang Qishao came, the Dong family would definitely give him face and serve him well. But now, it was fine if Fang Qishao did not speak up. Even if Fang Qishao spoke up now, the Dong family would not give him face. Seventh young Master Fang furrowed his brows as a rare gloomy look appeared in his eyes. In fact, Fang Qishao was different from other disciples who always talked about Sword King City. He rarely used his sect to oppress others, but today was the first time someone did not give him face and openly looked down on Sword King City. Ing Bailu did not speak, he just watched silently. The Ing clan was one of the 9 great families, just like the Dong family. Although Ing Bailu disapproved of the Dong family's behavior, he would not speak up to stop them. Yan Fian wanted to speak up for Lu Fengxian. After all, Lu Fengxian saved her just now. But when she saw what happened to Fang Qishao, she immediately swallowed her words. The Dong family was determined to snatch Lu Fengxian's inheritance. They did not even give face to Sword King City, let alone the Yunu Palace. After all, the Yunu Palace's strength was not comparable to Sword King City, and it was not even comparable to the Dong family itself. Chu Xiu raised the heavenly demon dance in his hand and said indifferently, humans need face, trees need bark. I didn't expect the Dong family to be so shameless this time. Dong Qikun, I'll give you face. You're a martial Dao grandmaster, the patriarch of the Dong family. If I don't want to give you face, it's not like I haven't killed martial Dao grandmasters before. Lu Fengxian also raised the unparalleled divine weapon in her hand. She did not say anything, but the black glass dragon on the unparalleled divine weapon let out a deep roar. In an instant, a ferocious aura burst out. The aura even made Dong Qikuan's expression change. Only then did Dong Qikuan realize that he should not have treated Chu Xiu as an ordinary unity of heaven and man cultivator. Although no one knew how Chu Xiu killed Xiao Yindong, it was Chu Xiu's real battle record. If he insisted on interfering in this matter, his deterrence would not be inferior to a real martial Dao grandmaster. Chapter 502. Chu Xiu's words were arrogant to others. Who did he think he was to kill a martial Dao master just like that? However, it was the truth when it came to Chu Xiu, who had just killed a martial Dao master. No one would take Chu Xiu's words as a joke. Besides Chu Xiu, Halberd and Wushuang had already acknowledged Lu Fengxian as their master. Even Dong Qikuan felt a little pressured when he sensed Halberd's aura. Although Lu Fengxian was only at the 5 Qis collecting in origin stage, he had just obtained Marquis Lu Wenho's inheritance after all. Dong Qikuan was not sure if he could unleash the power of the 9 transformation divine weapon. However, Dong Qikuan had already said it. If he tried to step aside now, he would lose all his face. Therefore, Dong Qikuan directly said to Su Ting, Brother Su, help me suppress these 2 junior martial artists. Haven't you always wanted to borrow my Dong family's divine sacrificial jade to strengthen your mental strength? If you help me today, I'll lend you the divine sacrificing jade for a year. Su Ting's eyes lit up when he heard that. He could not help but stand beside Dong Qikuan. The divine sacrificing jade was the Dong family's inherited treasure. Cultivating around it could strengthen one's mental strength. Even if one did not know any mental strength secret techniques, the divine sacrificing jade could still strengthen one's mental strength passively. However, the divine sacrificing jade was getting smaller and smaller. The divine sacrificing jade of the Dong family was the size of a fist, but it was only the size of a quail's egg now. Su Ting was weak in terms of mental strength. He had long wanted to borrow the divine sacrificing jade of the Dong family. However, even the people of the Dong family did not dare to use it recklessly, so why would they lend it to Su Ting? It was rare for Dong Qikuan to be generous, so Su Ting did not want to miss the opportunity. At the sight of this, everyone present shook their heads. Other than admitting defeat, Chu Xiu and LV Fengxian seemed to have no other way out of this. Chu Xiu had a record of killing a martial Dao grandmaster, and Lu Fengxian also had a divine weapon. However, they were facing 3 martial Dao grandmasters. It was impossible for them to defeat them. But at that moment, Xia Xiaolu suddenly stood out and said, "My master thinks highly of Brother Lu. You refuse to give face to the Guanzhong torture room and Sword King City. Are you going to refuse to give face to my master?" Dong Qikuan and the others frowned. To be honest, the World Alliance's strength was definitely inferior to Sword King City's. Although the Sword King City was stronger than Sword King City's strength, the Qinqing Di Tian was. Xia Tian could ask Fang Qi Shao to stop meddling, but he did not dare to say anything to Di Chen Tian to alone. However, with the 9 revolutions cultivation method in front of him, a disciple of Qinqing Di would not be able to scare Dong Qikuan away. Looking at Xia Xiaolu, Dong Qikuan smiled and said, "Young Master Xia, although you're Alliance Head Chen's disciple, you still need to be reasonable. I'll give face to Alliance Head Chen, and I wouldn't dare to go against him. However, this kind of matter also depends on what face is involved. Today, you said that Lu Fengxian was favored by Alliance Master Chen, and my Dong clan gave you face. Tomorrow, you said that Zhang Fengxian was favored by Alliance Master Chen, and I had to give you face again. Even though Alliance leader Chen was powerful, it wasn't to such an extent. How could he not allow others to touch someone he had his eyes on? There's no such tyrannical thing in this world. It's against the rules." Dong Qikuan's words caused the surrounding people to look at him with disdain. They hadn't realized before that Dong Qikuan, the head of the Dong family, was actually so shameless. It must be known that Dong Qikuan's current actions were incomparably tyrannical. What he was doing was breaking the rules, and now he was saying that others had broken the rules. Xia Xiaolu was immediately angered by Dong Qikuan's words to the point that his face turned red. He wasn't good with words, so he didn't know how to refute Dong Qikuan. However, at this moment, a thunderous and deafening voice suddenly resounded. "Dong Qikuan, were you the one who said that you weren't going to give me face? Who gave you the guts to say such words in front of my disciple?" As that voice rang out, a rumbling sound came from afar. Everyone looked up, only to see the trees in the distance being torn apart and falling to the ground. A black shadow quickly rushed over, like a black lightning, and in the blink of an eye, it had already arrived in front of Xia Xiaolu. It was actually a black tiger that was almost as tall as a person, and it was incomparably elegant. The black tiger squatted in front of Xia Xiaolu and reservedly stretched out its paw to pat Xia Xiaolu's back, as if it was comforting him. After seeing the black tiger, Xia Xiaolu's eyes immediately revealed a hint of joy. When they saw the black tiger, everyone's expression changed. In a place like West Chu, there were actually quite a few black tigers in the wilderness. However, there was only one that had this kind of terrifying speed and was so close to Xia Xiaolu. That was the black tiger that the World Alliance's alliance master, Qinqing Di, was raising. Sure enough, everyone looked in the direction that the black tiger came from and saw a figure slowly walking over. With a single step, it crossed a distance of several dozen feet. It was a middle-aged man dressed in black. The tight-fitting black robe wrapped around his burly body, revealing his arms. On his forearms, there was even a pair of gauntlets. On the gauntlets were dazzling golden dragon tattoos, constantly twisting in the sunlight. From the looks of it, it was not an ordinary item. On his waist, there was also a belt with the same golden dragon tattoos. From the looks of it, it was an existence that came from the same source as the gauntlets. A scarlet cloak fluttered behind him. It didn't look evil, but rather boundless domineering. That aura even made it hard for everyone present to breathe. The World Alliance's Qinqing Di. The Qinqing Di who used a pair of iron fists to conquer 1,000 miles of land. When everyone present saw Qinqing Di, no one paid attention to Qinqing Di's appearance. They could only feel the extreme aura coming from Qinqing Di's body. Xia Xiaolu was also stunned when he saw Qinqing Di. He muttered, "Master, why are you here?" This time's mountain opening ceremony was because Qinqing Di was too lazy to come here, so he sent Xia Xiaolu. But why did Qinqing Di personally come here? Qinqing Di lightly said, "Did you use the 100 by blade I gave you? I've left an imprint on it. As long as you use it, I'll be able to sense it. I have nurtured you for so long, wouldn't it be a pity if you were killed by something in the outside world?" Hearing Qinqing Di's words, Xia Xiaolu suddenly understood. He had used some of the life-saving treasures given to him by Qinqing Di in the big burial mound. He didn't expect that there would be Qinqing Di's mark on them. Although his master's words were very awkward, he was very protective of him. Xia Xiaolu was used to it, so he naturally turned Qinqing Di's words into concern. Dong Qikuan and the Dong family's old ancestor looked at each other. They didn't expect that Qinqing Di would come this time. Although they kept saying that even if it was Qinqing Di, he had to follow the rules, but now that Qinqing Di was standing in front of them, they couldn't say a word. Just when Dong Qikuan wanted to say something, Qinqing Di suddenly turned around and looked at him. He placed his left hand on the black tiger's head and gently stroked it. The handsome black tiger squinted its eyes like a kitten, enjoying Qinqing Di's stroking. Being stared at by Qinqing Di, Dong Qikuan instantly felt a powerful aura like Mount Tai pressing down on him. It was an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Dong Qikuan swallowed his saliva and said, "Qin," before he could say anything. Qinqing Di directly waved his hand and said coldly, "Just now, you said that you didn't want to give me face? You said that I didn't follow the rules? You said that I was overbearing?" Dong Qikuan hurriedly said, "Alliance leader Qin, listen to me." Before he finished speaking, Qinqing Di directly took a step forward. The ground under his feet suddenly cracked inch by inch, and the area within a radius of hundreds of feet was like an earthquake. With a punch, the whole world seemed to stand still in an instant, like a picture scroll. However, in the next moment, everything under that punch was shattered. God slaying God, fist shattering mountains and rivers. Dong Qikuan's expression suddenly changed, and countless sword lights rose from the long sword in his hand. Before he could fully display his sword force, everything was smashed by Qinqing Di's punch. Gang Qi exploded, and the weapons were shattered. Dong Qikuan was directly sent flying by Qinqing Di's punch for dozens of feet, and crashed into more than 10 giant trees in succession before he came to a stop. A large amount of blood gushed out, and he was immediately seriously injured. After withdrawing his punch, Qinqing Di said coldly, "There's one thing you're right about, I am that overbearing. How dare a piece of trash like you say that you don't give me face? Why do I, Qinqing Di, need you to give me face? What face do you deserve to give me?" This punch shocked everyone present. No one had expected that Dong Qikuan, who was also in the real pellet state and a martial Dao Grand Master, would be so vulnerable in the hands of Qinqing Di. At this time, the patriarch of the Dong family seemed to have come to his senses. Looking at Dong Qikuan who was seriously injured and vomiting blood, the patriarch of the Dong family shouted angrily, "Qinqing Di. This is the Dong family, you." Qinqing Di glanced at the patriarch of the Dong family. His figure moved, and some of the weaker people couldn't even see Qinqing Di's figure. However, in the next moment, Qinqing Di had already appeared in front of the patriarch of the Dong family. In horror, the patriarch of the Dong family directly formed a seal with his hands. After all, he was a martial Dao Grand Master of the older generation, and he still had some trump cards. Boundless dazzling starlight condensed, and each spot of starlight condensed into a formation, trying to stop Qinqing Di. However, Qinqing Di directly slapped down. In an instant, the Gang Qi exploded, and the starlight was shattered. Qinqing Di's right hand squeezed the patriarch of the Dong family's neck. The dragon pattern on the golden arm armor twisted like a formation pattern, directly sealing the genuine qi of the patriarch of the Dong family's whole body. At this time, he was like an ordinary person, held up by the neck by Qingqing, and stretched his legs helplessly. Staring at the patriarch of the Dong family, Qingqing said in a calm and cold voice, "Old thing, what do you want to say? This is your Dong family, so what? Among the 9 major families, there is still the Wang family and the Li family. Believe it or not, I can make this place no longer belong to the Dong family tomorrow." Chapter 503. He seriously injured Dong Qikuan with one punch and subdued the patriarch of the Dong family with one move. Qingqing's strength was beyond everyone's imagination. For most of the martial artists present, a martial Dao Grand Master was already an unreachable existence. But what about Qingqing? The 2 martial Dao Grand Masters were like children that could not withstand a single blow. Su Tingyi stood motionless. He was not calm, but he did not dare to move. Although he had just promised Dong Qikuan that he would stand on their side, under Emperor Qingqing's powerful aura, Su Tingyi was so scared that he didn't even dare to fart. Chu Xiu looked at Qingqing. He had a hunch that although Qingqing was still in the real pellet realm, he was not far from the true fire realm. He might even have half a foot in this realm. In the past, in the alliance of Demon Dao, Wuxia defeated Mountain Ghost of the Moon worshipping cult with one move. Although Qingqing had not reached Wuxia's realm, the strength of the 2 patriarchs of the Dong family was not as strong as Mountain Ghost of the Moon worshipping cult's 9 great divine magus priests. At this time, the silence was terrible. When Qingqing attacked, he looked down at everyone. His domineering aura could not be described with words. Dong Qikuan, who was seriously injured and vomited blood, did not dare to say another word. The patriarch of the Dong family, who was carried in the air by Qingqing like a dog, also did not dare to say another word. Seeing the look in Qingqing's eyes, the patriarch of the Dong family knew that Qingqing was not threatening him. He would do what he said. Although the Dong family and the World Alliance were both in West Chu, the Dong family rarely dealt with the World Alliance. One of them was one of the 9 great clans that had existed for a long time, while the other was an uncultivated force that had risen to power not long ago. The Dong clan had always maintained a respectful attitude towards the World Alliance and didn't want to provoke them. In the past, the Dong family had thought that even though Qingqing was overbearing, he still had to abide by the rules of the Jianghu. But after seeing him today, they realized that Qingqing wasn't overbearing at all. He was simply temperamental, and he acted like a madman without any scruples to the extreme. He had never considered whether the other 9 aristocratic families would come to him for an explanation if he really massacred the Dong family, whether the World Alliance would be damaged because of this, and how the West Chu martial arts world would view the World Alliance. It seemed that in Qingqing's eyes, there was only one result, and that was, those who obeyed him would prosper, and those who defied him would die. Sensing Qingqing's intention, the patriarch of the Dong family smiled bitterly and said, "Alliance leader Qin, my Dong family was rash in this matter. It's my Dong family's fault. I hope Alliance leader Qin can be magnanimous and let my Dong family off this time." As soon as he said this, everyone present was instantly dumbfounded. The faces of the Dong family's martial artists were flushed with shame and indignation, and they wished they could find a hole to hide in. Who didn't want to lose face in the Jianghu? But now, the patriarch of the Dong family's words could be said to be extremely soft. It was as if he had thrown his face to the ground and taken the initiative to trample on it. If this matter was spread out, the Dong family would become a laughing stock from now on. Compared with the Dong family, which had existed for thousands of years, the World Alliance had existed for less than 100 years. Compared with the patriarch of the Dong family, although Qingqing was powerful, his seniority was much lower than the patriarch of the Dong family. He and Dong Qikuan were of the same generation. But now, the patriarch of the Dong family had admitted defeat to Qingqing in an almost pleading tone. This was a great loss of face. In fact, only the patriarch of the Dong family knew that compared to his life, face was nothing. This time, the Dong family did not admit defeat. In the future, the Dong family's territory would really have to change its surname. With a cold laugh, Emperor Qinqingdi waved his hand and tossed the patriarch of the Dong clan aside. Then, he said coolly, remember, think before you speak next time. You should know who I am and what kind of person I am. I don't need you to give me face, and you're not qualified to give me face. The two martial Dao Grand Masters of the Dong family did not dare to say a word. Su Tingyi even lowered his head, hoping that Qinqingdi did not see him. However, at this moment, Qinqingdi also turned his eyes to him and said indifferently, "Are you also on the Dong family's side?" Su Tingyi hurriedly said, "Alliance leader Qin, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not from the Dong family. It's just that I'm in the Dong family now, and I have no choice. I also hate the Dong family for bullying the weak." Qinqingdi sneered, but he did not expose Su Tingyi. He just sneered and said, "Idiot. Do you think I'm unhappy with the Dong family bullying the weak? The point is not that the Dong family is bullying the weak, but whose juniors he bullied. Get lost, and be more careful next time." Hearing Qinqingdi's words, Su Tingyi felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders, and he immediately scrammed. At this moment, Qinqingdi finally turned his eyes to Chu Xiu and the others. Looking at Lu Fengxian, Qinqingdi said with a smile, "Kid, what did I say before? If you were willing to join the World Alliance and worship me as your master, how would the Dong family dare to snatch the opportunity from you? In the Jianghu, strength is very important, comprehension is very important, and luck is very important. However, a backer is also very important. How is it? Do you regret it now?" Lu Fengxian shook his head and said, "Thank you for your help, Senior Qin. However, I'm used to wandering around, and I have a master now. I can only thank Senior Qin for your kindness." Qinqingdi also shook his head. If Lu Fengxian changed his mind and wanted to join the World Alliance, then he wouldn't be Lu Fengxian. Similarly, Qinqingdi wouldn't appreciate him so much. At this time, Qinqingdi turned his eyes to Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu only cupped his hands at Qinqingdi and said, "Greetings, Senior Qin." Qinqingdi nodded and sized up Chu Xiu. He raised his eyebrows and said, "You're Chu Xiu. I've always heard Xia Xiaolu mention you. I heard that you killed a grandmaster this time. Although that guy is a bit useless, he's still a martial Dao grandmaster. You're not bad, very good." Xia Xiaolu looked at Qinqingdi in surprise. Others might not know, but he knew Qinqingdi's character. There weren't many people in the Jianghu who could make Qinqingdi say, "not bad," twice in a row. Lu Fengxian was the same. Since Qinqingdi said that Chu Xiu was not bad, then he was really not bad. At this time, Qinqingdi looked at Fang Qi Shao and said with a strange gaze, "You're also a good swordsman. There aren't many people in Sword King's city who are pleasing to the eye, but you're one of the few who aren't. I just don't know if Sword King's city will regret choosing you as its successor in the future." Fang Qi Shao's eyes widened as he touched his chin. Was Qinqingdi praising him or praising him? Why did he feel that something was wrong? However, Fang Qi Shao didn't think too much about it. In any case, Qinqingdi said that he was not bad. Being recognized by such a fierce person, even Fang Qi Shao felt a bit excited. Qinqingdi waved his hand and said, "Come with me. We'll go to the World Alliance to recuperate for a while. Don't worry, not to mention the inheritance of demon god Lu Wenho, even if you have the inheritance of the Kunlun devil cult, no one would dare to come to my World Alliance to exterminate demons." After saying that, Qinqingdi was about to leave. The Dong family's disciples made way for him, their eyes filled with awe. Just as Chu Xiu passed by the Dong family's disciples, Chu Xiu suddenly said, "Senior Qin, you've offended the Dong family this time. You've trampled on their dignity. However, I'm afraid that some people won't accept it, and they'll cause trouble for you again in the future. It's better to cut the weeds and get rid of the roots." As soon as these words were spoken, the members of the Dong clan were instantly stunned on the spot. The Dong clan's ancestor and Dong Qikuan cursed Chu Xiu in their hearts in unison. This bastard is simply malicious to the extreme. He's clearly provoking Emperor Qinqing to eradicate the Dong clan. Qinqing Di looked at Chu Xiu in surprise. Then he laughed and said, "Boy, you're really vicious. You're even more ruthless than me. However, it doesn't matter. I've cut the weeds and got rid of the roots before. However, I'm in a good mood today, so I'll let them go this time. If they don't know what's good for them, I don't mind changing the name of this place." Hearing this, the patriarch of the Dong family and Dong Qikuan both heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Emperor Qinqingdi acted according to his mood. If he was a little more rational and ruthless, he might really have slaughtered the entire Dong family. After Qinqingdi left, the patriarch of the Dong family and Dong Qikuan exchanged a glance. Their eyes were filled with bitterness. Now that Qinqingdi had left, would they dare to take revenge on him? Would they dare to look for trouble with the Heaven Alliance? Just now, Qinqingdi had left a great shadow in their hearts. He was like a demon god, and he was so powerful that they couldn't bring themselves to take revenge on him. After leaving the dense forest, Qinqingdi said to Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian, "You two kids, go back to the Heaven Alliance with me. I've said that as long as you're in the Heaven Alliance, even if you get the inheritance of the Kunlun devil cult, no one will dare to take revenge on you." Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian exchanged a glance. Chu Xiu stepped forward, cupped his hands, and said, "Thank you for your kindness, Alliance Leader Qin. However, I'm going back to the Guanzhong torture room with Brother Lu. Guanzhong is located between the three countries, and there aren't many forces around. Moreover, I believe that with the strength of the Guanzhong torture room, no one will dare to take revenge on us." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Qinqingdi didn't insist. He just nodded and said, "You can go back to the Guanzhong torture room. Guan Siyu isn't a weakling. Most importantly, the Guanzhong torture room has the shadow of Chu Juxia. If other forces want to rob the Guanzhong torture room, they will have to think twice." With that said, Qinqingdi turned his gaze to Lu Fengxian and said in a deep voice, "Little girl, are you really not considering taking me as your master and joining the Heaven Alliance? In this Jianghu, having a backer and not having one are two different things. Look at that little boy named Shu. His thoughts are deeper than yours, and he is stronger than you, but he still joined the Guanzhong torture hall and found a good backer." Lu Fengxian shook her head with a bitter smile and said, "Senior Qin, I'm a little embarrassed by your repeated invitations, but I really don't want to be here." Hearing Lu Fengxian say this, Qinqingdi didn't insist. After Xia Xiaolu bid farewell to Lu Fengxian and Chu Xiu, the two groups left. Chapter 504. After Lu Fengxian and Chu Xiu left, they prepared to return to the Guanzhong torture room. The news of LV Wenho's inheritance had not spread out yet, so as long as they rushed back to the Guanzhong torture room in time, they would not have to worry about anyone coveting the inheritance. In fact, the best way for Lu Fengxian now was to join a top-notch force like the World Alliance and find a backer to protect her. LV Wenho's inheritance was indeed tempting, but people like Qinqingdi had their own martial Dao, so they would not be interested in LV Wenho's inheritance, even if it was a 9-transformation inheritance. It was a pity that LV Fengxian looked like a person who was easy to talk to, but she was extremely stubborn. Not to mention Chu Xiu, no one could persuade her. At this moment, a voice suddenly came from the forest, and 4 Xiantian realm martial artists rushed over. After seeing Lu Fengxian, the 4 of them knelt on one knee, lowered their heads, and said in a deep voice, "We greet the Lord." Lu Fengxian was dumbfounded, and he asked doubtfully, "Who are you?" Hearing their tone, Chu Xiu suddenly reacted. Why did they sound like Shui Wuxiang and the others when they spoke in such a tone? Chu Xiu asked in a deep voice, "You are Shui Wuxiang and the others?" Among the 4, a tall and thin man with a blue face smiled bitterly, "Yes, we are." At this time, Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian suddenly remembered that these people were indeed not dead. At that time, Lu Fengxian had just fused with LV Wenho's true soul, and Shui Wuxiang and the others were already at the end of their lives, so they could only randomly choose 4 people to possess. As there were too many people at that time, Chu Xiu, and the others did not pay attention to the targets they were possessing. Lu Fengxian asked curiously, "Why are you calling me Lord now? I'm not Marquis Lu Wenhou, and it's because of me that Marquis Lu Wenhou's true spirit shattered. You should be looking for me for revenge." Shui Wuxiang bitterly smiled, "This is fate. Maybe in this era, Lord Wenhou no longer has the possibility of revival. Not only that, Lord Wenhou is 80% similar to Lord Wenhou when he was young. You have even inherited all of Lord Wenhou's cultivation arts, and even the divine weapon Unparalleled is willing to recognize you as its master. It can be said that you are the current Lord Wenhou. If we don't recognize you as our master, who else can we recognize?" Lu Fengxian frowned and wanted to refuse. He was used to being alone, so he didn't want to accept any servants at this time. However, at this time, Chu Xiu transmitted his voice to Lu Fengxian, "Brother Lu, take these 4 people. You won't lose out." Among the 4 of them, Shui Wuxiang was the most proficient in scheming formations. Although his combat power wasn't strong, he was extremely strange. Yan Qishao and Shi Jiuling were battle generals, and their strengths weren't weak. Xian Jiuyo didn't know what he was good at, but since he was able to follow Marquis Lu Wenhou in that era, he obviously wasn't a weakling. Don't underestimate them just because they are only in the Xiantian realm after the possession. They were once existences that surpassed the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. Although their strength is gone, they still have the experience. Now that they have cultivated again, it won't be difficult. If you take these 4 people, the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Lu Fengxian was quite convinced by Chu Xiu's vision. Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Lu Fengxian nodded and said, "Since it's like this, you can follow me. But first, you have to change your tone, it's uncomfortable to listen to it. Since you've already possessed, I believe you should understand some things about the current era, right?" Shui Wuxiang and the others nodded and said, We know." Lu Fengxian nodded and suddenly asked, "By the way, do you know how to make things like cultivation jade strips?" Shui Wuxiang said proudly, "Subordinates cultivation in the Tao of arrays is not inferior to those array masters of the Tao Gate. Of course I know how to make something as simple as cultivation jade strips, but I don't have the materials at the moment, so I can't make it. May I ask, Lord, do you want to keep it for a long time or for temporary use?" "If it's for temporary use, subordinate can make one now." Lu Fengxian said, "For temporary use." Shui Wuxiang nodded. He directly plucked a few wild fruits from the roadside, squeezed out the water, and condensed it with his true qi. Then, he outlined a few array patterns on it, and it actually turned into something that looked like a soft candy. "Lord, this thing can only be used once. As long as the cultivation technique inside is read by someone, or after 3 days, this thing will dissipate." Shui Wuxiang's face was a little pale. Right now, he was only in the Xiantian realm. Even making such a small thing had consumed a lot of his true qi. Lu Fengxian took it and infused the 9 heavens fiend golden body cultivation technique into it. Then, she passed it to Chu Xiu and said, "Brother Chu, it was you who brought me here this time. If not for you, I wouldn't have had any fate with Marquis Lu Wenhou's inheritance. This is Marquis Lu Wenhou's body tempering cultivation technique, 9 heavens fiend golden body. Keep it. When Shui Wuxiang's true qi recovers, I'll get him to make another cultivation jade strip and pass it to you." Hearing this, Shui Wuxiang hurriedly stopped her and said, "Lord, you can't. This is a legacy cultivation technique left behind by Lord Marquis Lu Wenhou. How can it be given out so casually?" Lu Fengxian did not get angry. Instead, he said with an indifferent expression, "Are you the Lord, or am I the Lord?" Shui Wuxiang smiled bitterly and did not continue to stop Lu Fengxian. He also discovered that although this Lu Fengxian's overall personality was different from Lord Marquis Lu Fengxian's, there were some details that were very similar to Lord Marquis Lu Fengxian's personality. As long as Lord Marquis Lu Wenhou decided on something, no one could stop him. Now, Lu Fengxian was the same. As long as he decided on something, no one could stop him. Such a personality could be said to be extremely decisive. However, no one knew whether it was good or bad. After all, in ancient times, if Marquis Lu Wenhou had listened to Shui Wuxiang's advice and temporarily kept a low profile, he would not have fallen into such a situation. Chu Xiu also did not stand on ceremony with Lu Fengxian. He took the cultivation technique imparting item and said, "Many thanks, Brother Lu. I also happen to be in need of a top-notch body tempering cultivation technique. I won't stand on ceremony with you. However, I don't need the demon god's unparalleled halberd. I am a saber user. Changing to halberd would take too much time." Hearing Chu Xiu's words, Lu Fengxian did not force the cultivation technique to Chu Xiu. The two of them brought Shui Wuxiang and the others back to the Guanzhong torture room. Inside the Guanxi torture chamber headquarters, hearing the news of Chu Xiu's return, the Ghost Hand monarch specially brought people out to welcome him. Chu Xiu had not even entered the door when the Ghost Hand monarch was already laughing and cupping his fists. "Congratulations to Lord for beheading a grandmaster and entering the 4th place on the dragon and tiger list." Chu Xiu asked in surprise, "This matter has already spread out?" The Ghost Hand monarch nodded and said, "It has been spread out for a long time. Lord, your reputation in the underworld is now becoming more and more resounding." Along the way, Chu Xiu was afraid of any accidents, so he had been rushing with Lu Fengxian at full speed, but he did not care about the news outside. The wind-sweeping buildings' actions were quite fast. The Ghost Hand monarch cupped his fists at Lu Fengxian and said, "I heard that young Marquis Wen has obtained the inheritance of the ancient demon god Marquis Lu Wenhou. This is also a cause for celebration." Lu Fengxian also greeted the Ghost Hand monarch politely. "Alright, let's go in and talk." Chu Xiu then asked the Ghost Hand king about what had happened during this period of time after inviting the crowd into the hall. The series of events that happened after Marquis Lu Wenhou's land of inheritance had spread throughout the underworld in a few days, and it was quite well known. Among them, the most outstanding one was Chu Xiu, who killed a grandmaster. After becoming the little celestial master Zhang Qingzhen, he was another young martial artist who killed a martial Dao grandmaster in public. Therefore, Chu Xiu was also promoted to the 4th place on the Longhu list. The previous 4th place was an extremely mysterious guy, soul-snatching saber Li Feilian. The number of times this person had attacked in the underworld could be counted on one hand. He attacked 11 times and killed 10 people. The only time he used 2 sabers to kill was a genius of the younger generation of Chunyang Dao sect. In the end, the younger generation of Chunyang Dao sect suffered a huge blow and was unable to recover. Although the title given to him by the people of the underworld was a little cliché, it really fit the image. When Li Feilian attacked, his saber would seize souls and blood. There had never been a survivor, no matter who the opponent was or what the opponent's identity was. Because of the death of their disciple, Chunyang Dao sect had been hunting him for a long time, but to no avail. However, it was unknown whether it was because of the Chunyang Dao sect's pursuit, but Li Feilian had not appeared in the underworld for the past 2 or 3 years, and there was no news of his achievements. Therefore, he could only give up his position to Chu Xiu. Moreover, this time, Li Feilian not only gave up his position to Chu Xiu, but he also gave up his position to Ying Bailu. He directly fell to the 6th place, and Ying Bailu returned to the 5th place on the Longhu list. In the big tomb, Ying Bailu fought Chu Xiu with all his strength, and they were evenly matched. With the strength that Ying Bailu showed, he was ranked behind Chu Xiu. The only thing he lacked was an amazing achievement like Chu Xiu. As for Lu Fengxian, his ranking still did not change. The reason was very simple. Although Lu Fengxian had obtained the inheritance, he did not have any achievements. The reputation list looked at reputation and achievements, and both were indispensable. However, everyone also believed that after obtaining Wenhou's inheritance, Lu Fengxian's strength would definitely skyrocket, and it was only a matter of time before his ranking rose. This was just a change among the younger generation, so Chu Xiu did not care too much about it. In fact, at Chu Xiu's position, he really did not care about the Longhu list. It was not only Chu Xiu, but it should be said that the top 5 existences on the Longhu list, like Ying Bailu and the others, did not care about the rankings on the list. Their own strength was there for everyone to see, so who was strong and who was weak, didn't they have a point in their hearts? Things like the Longhu list were just for fun. On the contrary, the martial artists at the bottom were fighting for a position in the rankings every day, and it was very lively. Apart from the changes on the Longhu list, the one who had really become famous this time was Qingqingdi, and the one who was out of luck was the Dong family. Qingqingdi had not made a move for a period of time. The people of the Jianghu were forgetful, and some people had even forgotten about Qingqingdi's former fame. As a result, when Qingqingdi made a move this time, the whole Jianghu knew about it, and people could not help but sigh. Qingqingdi was still the same Qingqingdi. Chapter 505. Qingqingdi was as domineering as ever. Some people even suspected that Qingqingdi was not far from the true fire spiritual cultivation realm. At the level of a martial Dao grandmaster, every improvement in cultivation was as difficult as ascending to the heavens, let alone taking another step forward. Qingqingdi was born in the wilderness. If he could step into the true fire spiritual cultivation realm, the Tianxia alliance would be really powerful. However, compared with the domineering Qingqingdi, the Dong family's reputation was ruined this time, and they played the role of a clown. Originally, the Dong family had disregarded the rules of the opening ceremony and robbed the opportunities of the younger generation martial artists, which was already very disreputable. As a result, the two Wu Dao Grand Masters of the Dong family were humiliated by Qingqingdi on the spot, which was a miserable scene. This time, it could be said that the Dong family's reputation was ruined. They were destined to become the laughingstock of Jianghu for several years, and even the disciples of the Dong family would not be able to raise their heads in Jianghu in the future. They had seen Wu Dao Grand Masters who were unafraid of death, but it was really rare to see someone like the patriarch of the Dong family begging for mercy in Jianghu. After learning about the situation, Chu Xiu and Lu Fengxian went to do closed-door training first. However, Lu Fengxian was in closed-door training to break through to the oneness of heaven and man, while Chu Xiu was recovering his primordial qi first. On the way, Chu Xiu only cared about hurrying and did not even have a rest. However, at this time, the Ghost Hand King said with some hesitation, "My lord, there's something I have to tell you." Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows and said, "What's the matter? Are those martial arts forces in Guanxi starting to make trouble again?" There was no lack of fools in Jianghu who were blinded by greed. Logically speaking, with the current strength and status of Chu Xiu in Jianghu, the Guanxi area should be very quiet. However, there were people who were blinded by a little profit, so if this kind of thing happened, Chu Xiu would not be surprised at all. The Ghost Hand King shook his head and said, "It's not those martial arts forces in Guanxi, but people from the Guannan branch." Chu Xiu frowned and said, "Yin Butong's men? What did they do?" Among the 4 branches of the Guanzhong torture room, Guanbei torture officer Chu Simo was on his side because his godson, Chu Xiaoda, had joined the 9-branch hall. Xiao Yi, the Guangdong penal officer, was the strongest, but he had always maintained a neutral position and did not help either side. Only this Yin Batong made things difficult for Chu Xiu. In fact, Yin Batong couldn't get over it. Chu Xiu had crippled his disciple and killed one of his disciples, but Yin Batong was a cold-hearted person. In all fairness, he didn't spend much effort on his 2 disciples. Moreover, Yin Batong had fought with Wei Jiuduan his entire life. Now that Chu Xiu had helped him get rid of Wei Jiuduan, Yin Batong should be thanking Chu Xiu. In the end, Yin Batong always thought of the grudge, so he naturally found Chu Xiu to be an eyesore. The Ghost Hand King said, "Your Excellency, you've been gone for a long time this time. The Guanxi region has been without a ruler for a long time, so some constables from the Guannan region have come to investigate smuggling. They often cross the border to investigate some forces at the border of the Guanxi region and the Guannan region. Even if those forces are in the Guanxi region, they still investigate them. They even blackmail those forces, causing the martial arts forces at the border of the Guanxi region and the Guannan region to suffer greatly. They have complained to me many times. Therefore, it's not good for me to continue accepting gifts from those forces. This matter has also caused the reputation of our Guanxi branch at the border to fall. Chu Xiu said with a gloomy face, the Guannan people came to our Guanxi area to investigate smuggling. They are the ones who crossed the border and broke the rules. Are you just going to stand by and let them be arrogant? Ghost Hand King smiled bitterly, my lord, we don't have a choice. Those people in Guannan said that the clue came from Guannan and spread all the way to Guanxi. We can take over, but we need my lord's warrant, because they also came with Yin Butong's warrant. Therefore, when Sir is not here, we can't be tough with the Guannan people. Yen Bugui wanted to take action, but I stopped him. It's not that I don't want to be tough, but when Sir is not here, once we take action, it will be hard to explain. Even if we are in the right, it will become unreasonable. I even suspect that the Guannan people are so arrogant that they are forcing us to take action. So I have been waiting for Sir to come back to deal with this matter. Chu Xiu nodded when he heard this. He patted the ghostly Hand King's shoulder and said, I misunderstood you. You are experienced and prudent. What you did was right. That fellow Yin Batong is most likely planning this. Yin Batong has been in the Guanzhong torture room for so many years and is very familiar with the rules of Guanzhong torture room. He should know that crossing the border is against the rules, but he still did it. Obviously, he is taking advantage of Chu Xiu's absence and no one in the entire Guanxi area can talk to him on equal terms. The Ghost Hand King asked, Sir, what should we do now? Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, I will go into seclusion for a while. Keep a close eye on the border between Guanxi and Guannan. If Yin Butong's people come here again, tell me. After giving the Ghost Hand King his orders, Chu Xiu went into seclusion. While recovering Yuan Qi, Chu Xiu also tried to practice the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body. In the original plot, LV Fengxian was the only one who cultivated this cultivation method. In addition, with LV Fengxian's personality, he would naturally not share these things about the cultivation method with others. Therefore, in the original plot, the description of this cultivation method was very vague. At this time, Chu Xiu let out a long breath after reading the cultivation method. Sure enough, although this cultivation method is very strong, it has a strong aura of Lu Wenhou, and its nature is very rough. The meaning of the Nine Heavens is the Nine Heavens, and the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body also has 9 realms. Every realm required one to follow the instructions of the cultivation method. One had to cleanse the body with powerful demonic energy and forcefully temper the body with demonic energy. Not to mention the pain involved. If one's physical body was weaker, they would directly cripple themselves while tempering their body with demonic energy. The higher the level of the cultivation method, the better it is. Although some cultivation methods have high levels, not everyone is qualified to practice them. For example, Chu Xiu's Avici 3 blades. If an ordinary person uses it, he will become a madman. Only people like Chu Xiu, who have a strong mind and a Buddhist treasure, glazed golden silk gu, dare to use it casually. The Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body is the same. The requirements for the cultivator are too high. Even if the Dong family obtains the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body, there are only a few people in the Dong family who are qualified to practice this cultivation method. Although a martial arts grandmaster like Dong Qikuan can forcibly practice several realms with his cultivation, he can only practice 3 realms at most, and his body will not be able to bear this kind of power. Lu Fengxian was born with divine strength, so there will be no obstacles for her to practice the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body. Chu Xiu has the Great Vajra divine strength as a foundation, and his body is not weak, so he is naturally qualified. Moreover, although the Nine Heavens Fiend Golden Body is simple and violent, and the cultivation conditions are rough, its power is unusually strong. Each step is a heaven, and each realm will greatly increase the strength of the body, and there is also demonic energy to protect the body. When the cultivation reaches the 9th realm, it will reach the level of the immortal demon body, and it is common for the cultivator to regrow broken limbs. For example, if the cultivator cultivates to the realm of LV Wenhou, he is simply an existence that cannot be killed, and even the Tao and Buddhist sects have to work together to suppress his body. At present, Chu Xiu possessed both the Buddhist and demon sex body tempering techniques. Who knew what would happen if he were to cultivate both at the same time? Inextinguishable golden body and inextinguishable demon body? However, Chu Xiu does not care about it. He cultivates Tao, Buddhist, and demon sex at the same time, so he is not worried about the cultivation method backfiring. Just after Chu Xiu has been in seclusion for a few days, the Ghost Hand King came to knock on the door of Chu Xiu's seclusion room, and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency, those people in Guannan have crossed the boundary again." A trace of coldness flashed in Chu Xiu's eyes, and he said, "Take me there." At this time, at the border between Guanxi and Guannan, in front of the Lu family's mansion, the Lu family master, Lu Qingqian, was speaking in a low voice to several Jianghu constables from the Guanzhong torture room. The Lu family is only a small family in Guanxi, and the Lu family master, Lu Qingqian, is only in the inner gang realm. The Jianghu constables said lightly, "Lu family master, we are investigating people smuggling contraband into West Chu, and the source is your Lu family. Does the Lu family master want to explain this matter?" Of course, it is fine if the Lu family master doesn't want to explain, but us brothers came all the way from Guannan, and after spending so much effort, we can't go back empty-handed, right? Why don't the Lu family master say something and we can drop this matter for now? Lu Qingqian said with a forced smile, "How much do you want?" In fact, Lu Qingqian was already used to this kind of thing, because it was not the first time. The Guannan region's Jianghu constables had been extorting the small aristocratic families of the border area for a period of time. This was already the third time for the Lu clan. Now, all the powers of the border area could be said to be filled with complaints. At the same time, they were cursing Chu Xiu in their hearts. They were all under the jurisdiction of Guanxi, and according to Chu Xiu's request, they had to give him a lot of offerings every month. Now they were being bullied, and Chu Xiu didn't even dare to fart, so how could they look up to him? In this border, many forces thought that Chu Xiu was tyrannical. He could be ruthless to the forces of Guanxi, but when facing outsiders, he would be terrified. The Guannan constables looked at each other and said lightly, "We don't want much. There are 8 of us here, and each of us has 10 taels of purple gold. 80 taels is enough." Hearing this, Lu Qingqian's expression suddenly changed, and he quickly said, "Gentlemen, my Lu family really can't take out so much purple gold." In fact, the Lu family had 80 taels of purple gold before, but this group of people had come to the Lu family 3 times in a few months, so how could they take out these things? The Jianghu constables heard this and sneered, "Can't take it out? Well, then come with me to Guannan Torture Hall." Chapter 506. The Jianghu arresters of Guannan were here to pick a fight. Anyway, this was Guanxi. What could they do even if they forced all the martial arts forces in Guanxi to rebel? It was the Guanxi branch that was having a headache. Moreover, Yin Badong had come with the intention of making trouble. He had even told his men not to worry so much. They could go too far, and if anything happened, he would take the blame. At this time, the people of the Lu family were filled with righteous indignation. This was going too far. If the Guanxi branch didn't care, they could go to the headquarters of the punishment hall to reason with them. But at this moment, a voice came from behind them. People from the Guannan branch came to Guanxi to arrest people. Who gave you the guts? Chu Xiu came with Ghost Hand King Tangya and a dozen other people. There was no anger on his face, but the oppressive atmosphere made the Jianghu arresters of Guannan slightly change their expressions. They had been arrogant here for a while, but Chu Xiu didn't show up. The words they had thought of didn't work, and the Ghost Hand King and the others didn't dare to meet them. So the Jianghu arresters of Guannan were very arrogant. But now, seeing Chu Xiu coming, and thinking of the rumors about Chu Xiu in the Guanzhong torture room and his reputation in Jianghu, even the Jianghu arresters who had been prepared couldn't help but feel a little nervous. But when they thought of Yin Badong behind them, the Jianghu arresters of Guannan torture hall seemed to be a little more courageous. He forced himself to say, "Official Chu, we didn't come to Guanxi to arrest people, but to trace the smuggling clues from Guannan to Guanxi. According to the rules of the Guanzhong torture room, if Official Chu wanted to take over the case, we would naturally hand it over. But Official Chu wasn't here before, so no one else was qualified to ask us to hand over the case. Chu Xiu stared at the cultivator from the Guannan branch. His expression didn't change in the slightest as he calmly said, "Let me ask you, who gave you the courage to come to Guanxi to arrest people?" Under Chu Xiu's gaze, the Guannan martial artist's forehead gradually oozed a layer of cold sweat, but he still forced himself to say, "Official Chu, I've already said that this is the rule." Chu Xiu waved his hand and cut off the martial artist's words. "I don't want to ask the same thing a third time. Since you don't want to tell me who gave you the courage, I'll just take it that you're extremely bold. Also, don't talk about rules with me. The premise of talking about rules is that you have the qualifications and strength. Only then can we play under the same rules. Who do you think you are to talk about rules with me?" Chu Xiu turned to Tangya and the others and said, "Break all their legs, abolish their martial arts, and let them crawl back to Guannan. I'd like to see if they still have the courage at that time." The Guannan martial artists' expressions suddenly changed, and they hurriedly said, "Official Chu, we are." But before they could finish speaking, Tangya and the others had already made their move. Previously, because of the Ghost Hand King's obstruction, Tangya and the others were unbearably aggrieved. Now that Chu Xiu had finally returned, if anything happened, Official Chu would naturally take responsibility. Since this was the case, what was there for them to be afraid of? Therefore, Tangya and the others directly attacked, and in an instant, the 8 Guannan martial artists' legs were broken and crippled. Miserable howls sounded instantly. Listening to the miserable howls, Lu Qingxian and the other Lu family members all trembled. Before, they still had some resentment towards Chu Xiu, but now they didn't even dare to have the slightest bit of resentment. At this time, Chu Xiu also looked at Lu Qingxian, and said lightly, "Lu family head, you have been wronged during this time." Lu Qingxian hurriedly said respectfully, "Don't dare, my lord, please don't say that. It was those Guannan people who went too far." Chu Xiu shook his head and said, "I, Chu Xiu, am not an unreasonable person. As long as you are willing to abide by my rules, then if anything happens, it will be my responsibility. This time it was my negligence, I will compensate for your Lu family's loss." Saying this, Chu Xiu directly threw out a cultivation method, but it was not his own cultivation method, but an ordinary cultivation method passed down by the Guanzhong torture room to the Jianghu constables. It was only a third revolution cultivation method, but it was extremely precious for the Lu family. When Lu family head saw that cultivation method, although he was also extremely envious, he still said, "Official Chu, you don't have to do this, I am ashamed to accept it." Chu Xiu said lightly, "I told you to accept it, so accept it. I don't want to say the same thing twice." Hearing this, Lu family head immediately put away the cultivation method, and shed tears of gratitude to Chu Xiu, without a trace of resentment in his heart. Ghost Hand King, who was behind, nodded. Milord's methods were getting more and more skillful. With such a combination of kindness and power, the Lu family would probably have to be respectful to Milord from now on, let alone resenting Milord. Listen to Official Chu, even if you were wronged, Official Chu would make it up to you, and he would never let you suffer losses. On the contrary, if you were disobedient, the Guannan martial artists who were still wailing on the ground were a good example. One day after this incident, all the martial arts forces in the entire Guanxi area knew that Official Chu was back. In the past, when Chu Xiu was here, those martial arts forces still resented him in their hearts, feeling that Chu Xiu was too lenient and too strict. But this time, when people from the Guannan area came to their door, they realized that although Chu Xiu was a little strict, once something happened, they still needed Chu Xiu to take responsibility. Thus, not only did this incident not affect Chu Xiu's reputation, but it also caused his reputation to soar. Of course, while Chu Xiu's reputation soared, some people, such as Yin Batong, were furious at this time. "Chu Xiu, you are so lawless." After seeing his 8 men's martial arts destroyed by Chu Xiu and their legs broken, Yin Badong was so angry that he directly smashed the table next to him. In fact, Yin Badong had already known the news that Chu Xiu returned to Guangzhou, but he did not ask his men to restrain themselves. Anyway, they had already caused trouble, so why should they restrain themselves? Chu Xiu was indeed famous in Jianghu, but here was the Guangzhou torture room. Everyone here was a torture officer, so everything had to be done according to the rules. Yin Badong had been in the Guangzhou torture room for a lifetime. No one knew these rules better than him. Chu Xiu was far from being able to compete with him in this aspect. However, Yin Badong did not expect that Chu Xiu did not care about the rules at all and directly destroyed 8 of his men. If Yin Badong swallowed this matter, he would not be able to stay in the Guangzhou torture room anymore. Let's go. Come with me to find Chu Xiu and ask for an explanation. As his voice fell, Yin Badong went straight to the Guanxi branch with a group of people. At the gate of the Guanxi branch, Tanya moved a chair over and leaned against it lazily to guard the door. Tanya naturally would not do something like guarding the door, but Chu Xiu had said that Yin Badong would definitely come to make trouble, so Tanya volunteered to guard the door here. He had also been very sullen during this period of time. If it were not for Ghost Hand Lord stopping him, not to mention Yan Bugui wanting to make a move, even he could not help but want to kill those arrogant guys. At this moment, at the end of the long street, Yin Badong came to the door with a gloomy face with a group of people. Seeing Tanya, Yin Badong said coldly, "Let Chu Xiu come out to see me." Tanya glanced at him and did not say anything. Yin Badong suddenly showed a touch of anger on his face and shouted, "I said, let Chu Xiu come out to see me. Are you blind or deaf? Didn't you hear me?" Tanya did not even look up and sneered, "Ridiculous. You don't even say your name? If you don't say your name, how would I know which Tom, Dick, or Harry you are? Besides, even if you say your name, Official Chu is busy with work, so he won't meet Tom, Dick, or Harry. Disrespectful words, you're courting death." Yin Butong's eyes showed a touch of anger. He took a step forward and immediately blasted a palm at Tanya. However, at this time, Tanya's figure was like a willow catkin. His figure was erratic and he easily dodged Yin Butong's palm. This caused Yin Badong to be taken aback. Yin Butong's nickname was the Shadowless Dragon. Although he was fat and short, his movement speed was not ordinary. However, where did this subordinate of Chu Xiu come from? He actually had such a cultivation level of speed at the Three-Flower Realm. However, after being stunned for a while, Yin Badong became even more furious and wanted to attack Tanya. However, at this time, Chu Xiu's cold voice came from inside, "Yin Badong, how dare you touch my people and my territory? Do you want to die?" Pushing the door open, Chu Xiu slowly walked out of the Guanxi branch with his men. When Yin Badong saw Chu Xiu, his eyes suddenly turned red, and he angrily said, "Chu Xiu, what do you mean by crippling 8 of my Jianghu constables? Killing each other is strictly prohibited in the Guangzhou torture room. What you've done has violated the rules of the torture chamber. If you don't give me an explanation today, I'll go to the hall master and ask for justice." Narrowing his eyes, Chu Xiu said faintly, "Law? Justice? Yin Badong, you know what those idiots under your command did. They offended their superiors, and it's already good enough that I didn't kill them. And you, don't think that I don't know who gave them the courage to do this. Wei Zheduan is dead, and the grudges of the past should be written off. However, you've provoked my bottom line again and again. Do you really want to die?" When Chu Xiu said the last sentence, an extremely strong pressure suddenly fell on Yin Badong. It was extremely fierce, and it immediately made Yin Butong's hair stand on end. There was a serious look in his eyes. In fact, Yin Badong was also considered a figure in the Jianghu. As the torture officer of Guanan, he could be considered a veteran in the Jianghu. He was also a person with real power in the Guangzhou torture room. However, the problem was that compared to Chu Xiu, Yin Butong's experience was like a frog at the bottom of a well. It was not worth mentioning. Now, those who could compete with Chu Xiu were the top talents of the younger generation, as well as the warriors of the older generation who had reached the master realm. To put it bluntly, Yin Batong was now not even qualified to challenge Chu Xiu. Chapter 507. Under Chu Xiu's pressure, Yin Batong felt a sense of horror in his heart. This was a feeling of fear, and it made Yin Batong feel very ashamed. He was a martial artist of the older generation, and his experience in the Guangzhong torture room was much deeper than Chu Xiu's. But now, he was actually suppressed to such a state in front of Chu Xiu. How could Yin Batong tolerate this? Taking a deep breath, Yin Batong snorted coldly. Chu Xiu, don't talk so much nonsense. You crippled 8 of my subordinates. You have to give me an explanation for this matter. Chu Xiu raised his eyebrows. Explanation? You still want an explanation? Fine, I'll give you an explanation. As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Xiu's entire body was instantly enveloped by a murderous intent. A boundless ferocious aura covered Chu Xiu's entire body. With a punch, he executed the immortal slaying god, heaven extinguishing earth annihilating oblivion killing fist. Being enveloped by that boundless ferocious aura, Yin Batong was instantly shocked. He had never expected that Chu Xiu would actually attack without any hesitation. He had already used a killing move right from the start. This time, when he saw Chu Xiu, Yin Batong had a strange feeling. It was only now that he understood what was strange about Chu Xiu. This Chu Xiu's attitude was completely different from before. Although Chu Xiu was also very aggressive before, in the eyes of those in the Guangzhong torture room, Chu Xiu was still an outstanding figure among the younger martial artists. When facing other torture officers, he could still maintain a respectful attitude. Even when facing Yin Batong, who deliberately caused trouble for Chu Xiu, Chu Xiu actually retorted verbally within the rules. But this time, when Chu Xiu faced him again, his attitude was extremely unyielding. No, it would be more appropriate to say that he was arrogant. He had no scruples at all. This was the change in attitude brought about by the gap in strength. Chu Xiu was a person who abided by the rules, but at the same time, he was also a person who did not like to abide by the rules. Your strength is the same as mine, so I'll play with you within the rules. However, if you're weaker than me, then there's no need to talk about rules. You can just attack me. Currently, in the entire Guangzhong torture room, there weren't many people who were qualified to talk to Chu Xiu about the rules. Obviously, Yin Batong wasn't that person. Under Chu Xiu's punch, Yin Batong was horrified. His first reaction was not to block, but to escape. Yin Batong's figure moved, and his gang chi spread all over his body like a gale. Then, he hurriedly retreated. However, at this moment, Chu Xiu's left hand formed a seal with a single hand. The wisdom fist seal was displayed, and in an instant, the gang chi field spread out. The net of heaven and earth, imprisoning everything. In the wisdom fist seal's gang chi field, Yin Batong's figure was not even as fast as a pheasant, not to mention a flying dragon. He could only watch as Chu Xiu's punch blasted towards him. The murderous aura was sharp, tearing everything apart. At this critical moment, a figure shrouded in a black robe suddenly appeared in front of Yin Batong and said in a hoarse voice, "Annihilating heaven and destroying earth, annihilating selfless killing punch? Young man, you've killed quite a lot of people. What do you think of this punch of mine?" As soon as he finished speaking, the black-robed man also blasted out a punch. The scarlet murderous aura around him condensed into a vortex, causing heaven and earth to howl and the wind and rain to change. It was actually the same annihilating heaven and destroying earth, annihilating selfless killing punch. As the two fists collided, the murderous aura on Chu Xiu's punch was instantly torn apart by the other party. A powerful force penetrated through his bones, causing Chu Xiu's expression to change. A wave of demonic aura rose around him, even with a wisp of golden light. This was the power that belonged to the nine heavens' demonic golden body. Bursts of demonic aura were heard, and Chu Xiu retreated more than 10 steps before he stopped. There was a hint of fear in his eyes as he looked at the black-robed man. The other party was also a martial Dao master, and he was much stronger than Xiao Liandong, who had died in his hands. The black-robed man looked at Chu Xiu and said with a chuckle, "I've heard about you from Si Ming. Young man, your strength is not bad, but don't be too arrogant. Don't think that you can look down on all martial Dao masters just because you killed a useless master." Yin Baotong, who was behind, immediately heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the black-robed man make a move. In fact, before coming here, Yin Baotong had not expected Chu Xiu to actually kill him. However, Yin Baotong was a veteran of the Jianghu, and he was used to being cautious. After all, Chu Xiu had a reputation in the Jianghu for killing martial Dao masters. Therefore, Yin Baotong had used the connections he had accumulated to find a backer. He had originally done this just in case, but he had not expected that this backer would really come in handy. Chu Xiu squinted at the black-robed man and asked, "Who are you?" The black-robed man stood with his hands behind his back and said calmly, "I'm Fang Sha, the second in command of the criminal division. Come to think of it, I can be considered your superior. You're also a secret agent of the criminal division." Yin Baotong had spent his entire life in the Guanzhong torture room, so his connections were certainly not that simple. In the past, Fang Sha and Yin Baotong had both been born at the bottom of the Guanzhong torture room, and they had worked their way up to their current positions. Although they were not life and death friends, and there was a huge gap between their current strength, they still had some ties. All these years, as the disciplinary officer, Yin Baotong had only begged Fang Sha a few times. Instead, he had always kept in contact with him. This time, Yin Baotong had asked Fang Sha for help, and Fang Sha would not refuse. Chu Xiu squinted at Fang Sha. He had heard of this person before. Although Chu Xiu was not a veteran of the Guanzhong torture room, after becoming the disciplinary officer of the Guanzhong torture room, he had learned many secrets about the Guanzhong torture room. The real combat power of the Guanzhong torture room was in the criminal division, and everyone in the Guanzhong torture room knew this. However, one could tell just by looking at the third leader, Si Ming. He was at the peak of the unity of heaven and man realm, and his combat power was extremely strong. Among the 4 disciplinary officers, the only one who could easily defeat Si Ming was the Guangdong disciplinary officer, Xiao Yi. Even with Si Ming's strength, he was only the third leader. One could imagine how strong the second leader and first leader of the criminal division were. Guan Siyu was not the only martial arts grandmaster in the Guanzhong torture room. However, if there came a day when the Guanzhong torture room had to reveal all its strength, then the entire Guanzhong torture room would not be far from being destroyed. Chu Xiu had heard about Fang Sha's background from Mei Qinglian. His background could be considered legendary. He was originally a young lieutenant in the Eastern Qi army, but he was severely injured during a battle with the Northern Yan army and was thrown into a pile of corpses. It was Chu Kuanga who rescued him from the pile of corpses and brought him back to the Guanzhong torture room. After recovering from his injuries, Fang Sha changed his name and joined the criminal division. It was not only to repay a debt of gratitude, but also to seek revenge. It was only later that Fang Sha found out that the reason why he lost the battle with the Northern Yan army was that he was framed during the political struggle in the Eastern Qi imperial court. He was innocent and implicated in it. Therefore, Fang Sha had been staying in the criminal division ever since. His methods were ruthless and cruel. If Si Ming was said to be decisive and merciless, then Fang Sha's methods could be described as cruel. Moreover, after Fang Sha stepped into the martial arts grandmaster realm, he returned to the Eastern Qi alone to seek revenge and annihilated his enemy's entire family. According to Mei Qinglian, this matter had aroused some dissatisfaction from Guan Siyu. However, Guan Siyu did not stop Fang Sha. The criminal division was the Guanzhong torture room's last line of defense. It was also the Guanzhong torture room's most powerful trump card. Although Guan Siyu was the hall leader, her words did not really carry enormous weight. At the very least, Fang Sha and Guan Siyu were of the same generation. It was only because of Chu Kuanga's kindness that he appointed Guan Siyu as the hall leader that he became obedient. However, Fang Sha would not only listen to Guan Siyu's words when it came to certain critical matters. Chu Xiu did not expect Yin Baotong to have such a relationship. Looking at Fang Sha, Chu Xiu said calmly, Leader Fang, this is a personal grudge between Yin Batong and me. You're the leader of the criminal division. Why are you interfering in this matter? Fang Sha said in a hoarse voice, personal grudge? You're all from the Guanzhong torture room. What personal grudge is there? Young man, how long have you been in the Guanzhong torture room? Don't treat the torture room's rules like child's play. Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, this has nothing to do with how long I've been in the Guanzhong torture room. Some people have been in the Guanzhong torture room their entire lives, but they have achieved nothing. At the very least, I, Chu Xiu, have helped the Guanzhong torture room make a name for itself in the underworld. How can a person who does not do his job be qualified? When Yin Batong heard this, he immediately became angry. However, he did not continue arguing with Chu Xiu. Yin Batong said to Fang Sha, Brother Fang, there's no need to talk nonsense with him. Someone broke the Guanzhong torture room's rules. We can't let this matter go. Let's reason with the hall leader. Yin Batong had seen the power of Chu Xiu's punch just now. It was so powerful that it frightened him. When it came to Chu Xiu's strength, Yin Batong had lost the courage to fight him head-on. Moreover, based on his understanding of Fang Sha, their relationship was not to the extent that Fang Sha would teach Chu Xiu a lesson just to help him vent his anger. Yin Batong glanced coldly at Chu Xiu, snorted coldly, and left with Fang Sha. At this time, Tanya walked out and shook his head in disdain. Yin Batong has lived for so long, but in the end, he only knows how to file a complaint. What a disgrace. Chu Xiu said indifferently, don't look down on filing a complaint. Sometimes, when the superior is accused too many times, even if you are in the right, it may become unreasonable. There's something called inertia. When someone files a complaint for the first time, the superior won't believe it. But when the second and third time, or a second or third person files a complaint, the superior will definitely think, why did someone have to file a complaint against you and not others? Is there a problem with you too? When Tanya heard this, he wanted to refute. He had a feeling that Chu Xiu's words were fallacious. However, when he thought about it carefully, Tanya helplessly realized that what Chu Xiu said actually made sense. Then, sir, what do we do now? Wait for Yin Batong to file a complaint? Tanya asked. Chu Xiu's eyes flickered with an indecipherable light. Of course we pack up and prepare to wait for the hall leader's summons. I want to see what tricks Yin Batong has up his sleeve this time. Chapter 508. The difference in strength would bring about a change in mentality. This was the case for the current Chu Xiu. In the past, when Chu Xiu was weak, he had to rely on the Guanzhong torture room to ensure his safety. Just like Qin Qingdi's evaluation of Chu Xiu, Chu Xiu's scheming was much deeper than Lu Fengxian's, and he did not have many principles. Therefore, Chu Xiu had chosen a reliable backer early on. At that time, Chu Xiu needed the Guanzhong torture room. Therefore, Chu Xiu had schemed in many ways and joined the Guanzhong torture room as an inspector. But now? Chu Xiu had become the fourth outstanding figure on the Longhu list. He also had the powerful battle power of a grandmaster. For the Guanzhong torture room now, it was no longer Chu Xiu who needed the Guanzhong torture room. It was Guanzhong torture room that needed Chu Xiu. Now, if Chu Xiu wanted to find a capable backer, there were many forces in the underworld who would gladly welcome Chu Xiu. Moreover, Chu Xiu could choose to directly expose his identity of the Devil Dao and completely appear in the underworld as a member of the Yinma lineage. Anyway, there were many ways out for Chu Xiu. If the Guanzhong torture room forced him, the fourth on the Longhu list, out of the Guanzhong torture room, he would really become a laughing stock in the underworld. A few days later, as expected, someone from the torture chamber's headquarters came to invite Chu Xiu to the torture chamber's headquarters. The person who came to invite Chu Xiu was Guan Siyu's disciple, Yuqi. After seeing Chu Xiu, Yuqi cupped his hands and said to Chu Xiu respectfully, "Official Chu, Yin Batong complained about you in front of Master." This matter is not small, so master wants you to go and settle this matter. Yuqi's attitude toward Chu Xiu was very respectful. He simply regarded Chu Xiu as an existence on the same level as his master, Guan Xiu. Yuqi had always been a person who had a sense of propriety. Although Chu Xiu had joined the Guanzhong torture room at the beginning, Chu Xiu's status was as different as heaven and earth. Perhaps Yin Batong and the others who had been in the Guanzhong torture room for a long time still relied on their seniority to look down on Chu Xiu. However, in the eyes of the younger generation of warriors like Yuqi, Chu Xiu's achievements were absolutely at a level that they had to look up to. Yuqi understood very well that with Chu Xiu's current reputation and status in the underworld, the Guanzhong torture room needed Chu Xiu far more than Chu Xiu needed the Guanzhong torture room. Therefore, from Yuqi's speech just now, Chu Xiu could hear some inclination. Yuqi called Chu Xiu master, but he directly called Yin Batong by his name. This was already very obvious. Chu Xiu smiled and said, "Brother Yuqi, you don't have to do this. You and I are old acquaintances. Wouldn't this make us seem distant?" Yuqi just smiled and didn't say anything. Chu Xiu gave him face because Chu Xiu wasn't arrogant, but he couldn't take it for granted. After giving a few instructions to the Ghost Hand King and the others, Chu Xiu directly followed Yuqi to the torture chamber's headquarters. On the way, Chu Xiu asked, "Brother Yuqi, after Uncle Yin informed me, did Hall Master Guan have any reaction?" Yuqi said, "Master didn't have any reaction. He only said that he was gathering a few torture chamber masters to discuss matters and asked me to invite you over." Hearing Yuqi say this, Chu Xiu immediately had a plan in mind. The key to this matter didn't lie in Chu Xiu's side, but in Guan Xiu's attitude. Moreover, Chu Xiu also saw some other problems in this matter. It seemed that within the Guanzhong torture room, Guan Xiu actually didn't really mean what she said. It was true that the previous hall master, Chu Kuanga, always meant what he said, but compared to Chu Kuanga, Guan Xiu wasn't just lacking in strength and reputation, but also experience. Among the current generation of torture chamber masters, apart from Wei Jiuduan who had already passed away, the other three could be said to be of the same generation as Guan Xiu. Moreover, apart from the few of them, there was also Fang Sha, who was the second in command of the punishment chamber, and the mysterious big leader. In the past, they only listened to Chu Kuanga. Although Guan Xiu had become the hall master, the punishment chamber couldn't possibly listen to Guan Xiu in everything like they did to Chu Kuanga. In fact, Chu Xiu had already sensed this before. The punishment chamber had so many chiefs, but only Si Ming always followed behind Guan Xiu. It was obvious that among these chiefs, only Si Ming was Guan Xiu's true confidant and would listen to Guan Xiu completely. Logically speaking, it was true that Chu Xiu had been overly ruthless in this matter. Chu Xiu was confident because of his current strength and status. As long as he didn't kill Yin Batong on the spot and put Guan Xiu on the spot, the final outcome of this matter would definitely be Guan Xiu punishing both parties. She would tell Yin Batong not to cause trouble, and she would also reprimand Chu Xiu for not abiding by the rules. But now, Yin Batong had found Fang Sha. This was a trump card for Yin Batong, but in Chu Xiu's opinion, this was a foolish move. As the torture chamber master, Yin Batong was Guan Xiu's direct subordinate. Yet, he was now colluding with the second in command of the punishment chamber. What was the meaning of this? Was it because I, Guan Xiu, did things unfairly? Although Chu Xiu wasn't that well behaved, he had nothing to do with the group of old people in the Guanzhong torture room who had complicated relationships. Chu Xiu would forever be Guan Xiu's subordinate. In this case, Chu Xiu already had a rough idea of how things would develop. After following Yuqi to the Guanzhong torture room, Chu Xiu went straight to the meeting hall. The other torture chamber masters were already there. When Yin Batong saw Chu Xiu, he snorted coldly but didn't say anything. Although Chu Xiu's punch hadn't injured Yin Batong, the news had already spread. Some people even said that if Fang Sha hadn't intervened at the end, Yin Batong would definitely have suffered a huge loss at Chu Xiu's hands. Chu Simo smiled at Chu Xiu and said, "Official Chu, You've made a name for yourself in the pugilistic world this time. You killed a grandmaster and stepped into the 4th place on the Longhu leaderboard. Congratulations. Chu Xiu returned the greeting and said, Official Chu, you don't have to be so polite. We both have the surname Chu, so it feels awkward addressing each other like this. Official Chu is my senior, so you can just call me by my name. Xiao Yi also chuckled and said, I heard that you have a good relationship with that kid, Fang Qi Xiao. That kid isn't easy to deal with. It's a good thing you can stand him. Chu Xiu said in surprise, Lord Xiao, you know Fang Qi Xiao. Xiao Yi nodded and said, Don't forget, I'm also from the Forgetting Sword Hut. Back then, when that kid, Fang Qi Xiao, was young, the people of Sword King City often brought him to the other major sword sects to show off. It was called a spar between the younger generation, but it was actually to show off. It's just that although that kid's sword is strong, his mouth is even worse. He was so angry that the disciples of the Forgetting Sword Hut almost fought him to the death, but I stopped them. However, that kid's progress is really terrifying. I'm also old. The junior from back then has now surpassed an old guy like me. Actually, Xiao Yi wasn't that old. His actual age was only around 40, and he was already at the peak of one with heaven. He had the potential to become a martial Dao grandmaster in the future. However, compared to the young geniuses like Fang Qi Xiao and Chu Xiu, Xiao Yi seemed a little mediocre. Chu Xiu smiled and said, Extraordinary people have extraordinary things. There's nothing wrong with Fang Qi Xiao's current personality. It's better than someone who likes to play tricks in the dark. At this point, Chu Xiu even glanced at Yin Batong. It was obvious that he was hinting that Yin Batong was stirring up trouble while Chu Xiu was not in Guanxi. Also, Lord Xiao, you don't have to belittle yourself. With your strength, it's only a matter of time before you step into the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. Xiao Yi laughed and said, That's the martial Dao Grandmaster realm. There are so many martial artists in the world, and there are countless who want to step into that realm. However, how many of them can break through this bottleneck? I, Xiao Yi, am not that ambitious. I'm already satisfied that I'm able to preserve this bit of strength. After exchanging some pleasantries with Xiao Yi, Chu Xiu also saw the second-in-command of the Criminal Investigations Division, Fang Sha. However, Fang Sha only sat there and did not say a word. Chu Xiu raised his brows. It seemed like he could tell from the seats that everyone present was divided into 2 sides. Xiao Yi was neutral, but he had always supported Guan Siyu. Therefore, he sat on the left with Chu Simo. Meanwhile, Fang Sha sat on the right with Yin Batong. However, Fang Sha did not appear to be very close to Yin Batong. After a while, Guan Siyu brought the Criminal Investigations Division's third-in-command, Si Ming, into the conference hall. Si Ming looked at everyone in the hall, but he did not choose to sit next to Fang Sha. Instead, he sat next to Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu secretly raised his brows. It seemed like his previous speculation was right. The Guangzhong torture room was not united, and the Criminal Investigations Division was the same. Looking around at everyone in the hall, Guan Siyu said in a low voice, I believe everyone knows why I've gathered everyone here today. The Guangzhong torture room strictly forbids internal strife. This is the bottom line of the Guangzhong torture room. All these years, the Guangzhong torture room has established a foothold between the 3 countries. Every step we take can be said to be treading on thin ice. Internal strife, which is a waste of our strength for no reason, is absolutely not allowed to happen. Yin Batong, Chu Xiu, tell me, how should this matter be resolved? Chu Xiu looked indifferent and did not speak, but Yin Batong stood up and cupped his hands at Guan Siyu. Hall Master, Chu Xiu crippled 8 of my Jianghu constables. He is vicious and merciless. He doesn't think of himself as a member of the Guangzhong torture room at all. This fellow is so vicious to his own people. It is obvious what he is thinking. He is probably someone who has made a name for himself in the Jianghu and has grown strong enough to ignore the Guangzhong torture room. I'm afraid he already has disloyalty in his heart. When he said this, even Chu Xiu looked at Yin Batong with a trace of astonishment in his eyes. The older, the wiser. This fellow had fought with Wei Zheduan in the Guanzhong torture room for such a long time. Other than being narrow-minded, his thoughts were also very sinister. His words directly turned the personal grudge between him and Chu Xiu into Chu Xiu not respecting the Guanzhong torture room and harboring disloyalty. And the crux of the matter was that Yin Batong was not wrong. Chu Xiu really thought so. Chapter 509. Following Yin Batong's words, everyone present turned to look at Chu Xiu. In all these years, although there had been infighting in the Guanzhong torture room, Chu Xiu was the one who had gone overboard. The other Guanzhong torture rooms' infighting had been done in secret. Although there had been casualties, they had at least kept up appearances. But what about Chu Xiu? However, he had openly crippled 8 Guannan cultivators in front of everyone. His attitude could be said to be extremely arrogant. Guan Siyu didn't get angry. He just looked at Chu Xiu and said in a deep voice, "Chu Xiu, what do you have to say?" Chu Xiu knocked on the table, sighing with each knock. He said in an indignant tone, "Yin Batong, your words really make one's heart turn cold. If I, Chu Xiu, had any other intentions, would I still be sitting here? Yin Batong, do you know that the most favored 13th Prince Xiang Chong of the Northern Yan Emperor had personally tried to recruit me and promised me an important position in the court? Yin Batong, do you know that the second Prince LV Longguang of Eastern Qi, who was even more powerful than the Crown Prince, had promised me to join his army? Yin Batong, do you know that in West Chu, the World Alliance's Qinqing Di looked favorably upon me? His direct disciple Xia Xiaolu and I were good friends. Eastern Qi, Northern Yan, West Chu, with my current strength and reputation, where can I not go in this big world? The reason I stayed in the Guanzhong torture room is because I, Chu Xiu, know what kindness is. In the past, when I was at my lowest, it was the Guanzhong torture room that took me in. Although I have a bit of reputation now, I don't want to abandon Guanzhong torture room. In the end, you're here spouting nonsense and pestering endlessly for the sake of forcing me to leave. Yin Batong, what sort of intentions do you have? Chu Xiu's words were full of self-righteousness, as if he had been greatly wronged. However, in the end, he didn't say why he had crippled the 8 Guannan cultivators. Yin Batong snorted coldly and said, "Chu Xiu, don't try to change the subject here. How do you want to settle the matter of you crippling my 8 subordinates?" Chu Xiu narrowed his eyes and said, "How?" Yin Batong, where were they crippled? In my Guanxi region. Don't you know why a cultivator from your Guannan land came to my Guanxi land? Just as Yin Batong was about to say something, Chu Xiu interrupted, "Yin Batong, you don't have to say any more excuses. I don't want to hear them. I crippled 8 of your subordinates, but so what? I'm the Guanxi disciplinary officer. In terms of status, I'm above them. These 8 people didn't respect my superiors. In the long run, the Guanzhong torture room's discipline is bound to be lax. I crippled them now in order to reorganize the Guanzhong torture room's discipline. Isn't that fine?" Chu Xiu was clearly twisting words and forcing logic. Yin Batong secretly looked at Guan Siyu, but she was still expressionless and did not make a sound. Seeing this, Yin Batong also got a little anxious and secretly signaled to Fang Sha with his eyes. He did not plan on letting Fang Sha make a move on Chu Xiu. But in this sort of situation, Fang Sha stood on his side and spoke for him. "That should be fine, right?" Fang Sha coughed when he heard that and said in a hoarse voice, "Chu Xiu, even if we want to reorganize discipline, it's not your turn to make a move. You're the Guanxi disciplinary officer, but you came to deal with Guannan people. If this isn't overstepping your bounds, what is?" Chu Xiu retorted with a question. "Then what should I do?" Fang Sha said, "Naturally report it to the main hall." Chu Xiu sneered and said, "What a joke. I, a dignified Guanxi disciplinary officer, actually have to report it to the main hall to deal with a few low-level minor characters. Where's the dignity of a disciplinary officer? Moreover, if we're talking about overstepping your bounds, the one who really overstepped your bounds should be Lord Feng. Lord Feng, you should know what the criminal division does. Why are you here now? Feng Sha's eyes revealed a cold glint. Compared to arguing, he was still more willing to take action. Right then, Guan Siyu suddenly said in a deep voice, "All right, all of you shut up." Upon hearing this, everyone present immediately fell silent. Guan Siyu looked at Yin Batong and said in a deep voice, "Yin Batong, is your Guanan too idle? You even ran to the Guanxi area to investigate? In the future, it's best that you don't meddle in things that don't belong to you." Yin Batong looked at Guan Siyu in astonishment. He didn't understand why he would suddenly be reprimanded by Guan Siyu. Chu Xiu sneered inwardly. Yin Batong had too many schemes, but he just didn't understand the most critical point. Since he looked for Feng Sha and asked Feng Sha to speak up for him, it meant that Yin Batong was no longer on Guan Siyu's side. It could be said that he had completely offended Guan Siyu. Yin Batong wanted to retort, but he wasn't completely muddle-headed. In the end, he forcefully swallowed his retort. Meanwhile, Guan Siyu turned her gaze to Chu Xiu and snorted coldly. "Also, Chu Xiu, you've caused too much trouble outside recently. Do you still think you're outside after returning to the Guanzhong torture room? You'd better stay in the Guanxi area and reflect on your actions. You're not allowed to take a step out of the Guanxi area." After speaking, Guan Siyu waved her hand and said, "All right, this matter ends here. You're dismissed." Everyone present had a strange look on their faces. Only Yin Butong's expression was somewhat ugly. Even an idiot could tell that Guan Siyu was actually protecting Chu Xiu this time. It was obvious that Chu Xiu had crippled someone, but Yin Batong had been reprimanded. Although Chu Xiu had also been punished to reflect on his actions, this was nothing to Chu Xiu. Chu Xiu had just stepped into the unity of heaven and man realm. At this time, he needed to go into seclusion to sort out his strength and build a solid foundation. The so-called reflection could be considered seclusion. Anyway, Chu Xiu didn't plan on going out again. After everyone left, Chu Xiu hadn't left the main hall. At this time, Yuqi suddenly walked out and said in a low voice, "Official Chu, Master wants you to go over." Chu Xiu nodded in understanding and followed Yuqi to Guan Siyu's study. At the moment, Guan Siyu's face was expressionless. It was as if she hadn't been the one reprimanding Yin Batong and Chu Xiu. As she looked at Chu Xiu, Guan Siyu suddenly sighed and said, "Do you understand what happened before?" Guan Siyu's words were somewhat unclear, but Chu Xiu nodded and said, "I understand. It seems that in the entire criminal division, besides third leader Si Ming, the other two leaders don't seem to respect you, Hall Master." Guan Siyu sighed again and said, "Ever since I took over the position of Hall Master, I've been trembling with fear and trepidation. In the end, I developed the Guanzhong torture room to this stage. Unfortunately, to some people, I'm actually very lucky to be in this position." In the past, when Guan Siyu took over the Guanzhong torture room, it couldn't be said that he was lucky. It could only be said that Chu Kuanga had a good eye for talent. However, at that time, Guan Siyu didn't have the greatest authority in the Guanzhong torture room, but Chu Kuanga chose Guan Siyu to become Hall Master. This was very puzzling. However, in the end, Guan Siyu succeeded and successfully developed the Guanzhong torture room to this stage. This puzzling turned into recognition. Unfortunately, in the Guanzhong torture room, there were still people who didn't recognize Guan Siyu. Not to mention these people's strength, just based on qualifications, they weren't inferior to Guan Siyu's. Chu Xiu said in a low voice, "In order for the Guanzhong torture room to reach its current scale, besides Chu Juxia's good foundation, it also couldn't do without Hall Master's help. Some people just don't know how to appreciate favors. They need to be taught a lesson from time to time." Guan Siyu narrowed his eyes and said, "I've already taught them a lesson. There's no need for a second time." "Chu Xiu, you went from being a wanted person to becoming the Guanxi torture room's current Guanxi torture room. The Guanzhong torture room can give you many things. I just hope that you won't betray the torture room." This is the lightest punishment I can give you. If you do it again, you'll be punished severely. After hearing this, Chu Xiu lowered his head and walked out. Guan Siyu had just said that some people needed to be taught a lesson, but in the blink of an eye, Chu Xiu was taught a lesson. In fact, Chu Xiu's behavior this time was somewhat against the rules. He relied on sophistry. Guan Siyu could stand on his side completely because Yin Batong was muddle-headed and actually joined forces with the people from the Criminal Investigation Division. After leaving Guan Siyu's place, Chu Xiu planned to directly return to Guanxi. He did not expect Mei Qinglian to walk out from the small path with a smile on her beautiful face. You came to the main hall once, yet you don't plan on coming to see me? Chu Xiu, you really have no conscience. Chu Xiu said with a bitter smile, Madam, if I came to see you, I'm afraid it would be inappropriate. I just came out of Hall Master Guan's place. Mei Qinglian waved her hand and said, Come with me. Don't worry. Guan Siyu is very worried right now, so she doesn't have time to care about you. Hearing Mei Qinglian say this, Chu Xiu directly followed Mei Qinglian to her room. After closing the door, Mei Qinglian chuckled and said, You've made quite a name for yourself in West Chu this time. You even killed a martial arts grandmaster. Chu Xiu shook his head and said, Madam Saintess, you don't have to make fun of me. You know my strength. The martial arts master I killed was only a weak rogue cultivator, and I had to use some tricks to kill him. If I encounter a real martial arts master, I can only choose to escape. Mei Qinglian waved her hand and said, You don't have to be overly modest. With your current strength, you can already stand shoulder to shoulder with Zhong Xian and Zhang Qingjin. My Yinma bloodline is lucky to have you among the younger generation. Otherwise, no one would be able to compete with Zhong Xian and Zhang Qingjin. That little girl from the moon-worshipping cult is very mysterious. Moreover, she is from the bright demon bloodline, so she can't represent my Yinma bloodline. Chu Xiu nodded and said, That's right, Madam Saintess, Guan Siyu still can't completely control the Guanzhong torture room. Is it because of those people from the criminal division? Mei Qinglian snorted and said, What else do you think? I can deal with Guan Siyu, but I can't deal with others. If it weren't for those annoying guys, the Guanzhong torture room would have become a secret branch of my Yinma bloodline. Would I still need to be so careful? You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.